Snow fell like scattered diamonds across the pavement outside Fort Carson's main gate. The cold settled deep into concrete and steel, into the bones of buildings that had seen 60 winters of soldiers coming and going. December wind carried the sharp bite of Colorado altitude, the kind that makes breath visible and fingers ache inside gloves that were warm enough yesterday but never warm enough tonight. The buses idled in formation near the departure terminal, their exhaust pipes breathing white clouds into darkness. Diesel engines hummed low and steady, a sound that meant movement, meant escape, meant somewhere warmer than this frozen corner of the world. Families gathered in clusters beneath the terminal lights. Wives adjusted scarves around husbands' necks. Fathers gripped sons' shoulders with that particular pressure that means come home safe. Children bounced on cold toes, too young to understand deployment, but old enough to know daddy was leaving again. Soldiers stood in loose groups near the stacked duffels, checking phones one last time, trading jokes that landed softer than usual. Everyone wore the same expression: relief mixed with guilt. Grateful to be going home, but aware that somewhere, someone else was heading the opposite direction. New Year's leave felt earned after 11 months of mountain training rotations, cold weather exercises that turned hands into claws and made sleep a battle against hypothermia. Near the far corner of the terminal, away from the laughter and the families and the heat of collected bodies, a woman stood alone. Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie, 32 years old, held a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen twine. The box fit inside her palm, simple, plain, the kind of gift that carries weight not in dollars but in what it represents. Her leave form sat folded in her jacket pocket, signed by 3 different officers, stamped with approval codes, ready for the scanner at the bus door. She looked like someone who had already checked out mentally, who was counting minutes until wheels rolled and distance grew between her and this place. Her uniform was standard issue cold weather gear, fleece jacket zipped to the collar, boots laced tight, patrol cap pulled low. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything other than another logistics NCO heading home for the holidays. Corporal Marcus Webb stood 20 feet away with 3 younger soldiers, their laughter carrying across the cold like breaking glass. He was 24, built like someone who spent more time in the gym than the field, confidence that came from never having been truly tested. His voice rose above the others, designed to be heard, designed to establish pecking order. Someone needs to check her paperwork. Probably filed it wrong. Admin types always screw up the simple stuff. His buddy, a private fresh from basic, grinned. You think she even knows how to chamber around? Looks like she'd flinch at the sound. Another voice joined in. Logistics queen probably never left the wire. Cushy desk job, 9 to 5, climate-controlled office while real soldiers freeze their assess off. The jokes rolled like momentum, each one building on the last, the way cruelty does when nobody stops it. They talked about her like she wasn't 15 feet away, like she couldn't hear every word, like she was scenery instead of a person. Sarah didn't lift her head, didn't turn, didn't offer correction or defense. Her silence was complete, the kind that looks like acceptance, like someone who's heard it all before and decided words won't change minds. She shifted her weight slightly, favoring her left leg in a way that suggested old injury, something that never quite healed right. The package in her hand caught a reflection from the overhead lights, brown paper going soft at the corners where her thumb rubbed unconsciously. Inside that wrapping, nested in tissue paper she'd folded carefully 3 times, sat a Bronze Star medal in its original presentation case. Not hers, her father's. Technical Sergeant William MacKenzie, Army Corps of Engineers, awarded for valor during a bridge collapse rescue in 2003. He'd given it to her 2 years ago, 3 months before a patch of black ice on I-25 sent his truck into a concrete pillar at 60 miles per hour. He died instantly, the state trooper had said. Didn't suffer, as if speed of death somehow reduced the loss. Sarah was supposed to give the medal to her mother tonight, return it to the person who should have had it all along. Helen MacKenzie, retired brigadier general, the kind of woman who commanded rooms without raising her voice, who wore 62 years like armor. Sarah hadn't been home for Christmas in 4 years, hadn't seen her mother outside of brief phone calls that always ended with the same question. When are you coming home, baby? Soon, mama, soon. Lies told kindly are still lies. The bus drivers began calling zones. Alpha passengers begin boarding. Families press closer for final hugs. Someone was crying near the third bus, a sound that cut through diesel rumble and conversation. Sarah checked her watch. 2300 hours. Wheels up at 23:30. Denver by 0200. Her mother's house in Colorado Springs by 0300 if traffic stayed light. She could almost see it. The Victorian on Cascade Avenue with the wraparound porch and the ancient elm in the front yard. Lights would be on. Her mother never slept well when Sarah was traveling. There would be coffee brewing, the good kind from the French press, and probably pie because Helen MacKenzie believed pie solved most problems. Sarah would walk through that door, set down her bag, hand over the small brown package, and maybe finally, after 4 years of running, she could sit in her father's chair and remember how to breathe without the weight of ghosts pressing down on her chest. That was the plan. The plan died when the siren tore through the night like a blade through silk. The sound wasn't subtle, wasn't a gentle alert or a courtesy warning. It was violent, immediate, designed to shatter focus and demand attention. Red emergency lights began rotating above the terminal entrance, casting everything in alternating shadow and crimson. The buses stopped mid-boarding. Families froze mid-hug. Every head turned toward the operations building where the siren's scream originated. The electronic announcement boards above the terminal doors flickered from green departure schedules to flashing red emergency protocol. Text scrolled across in block letters, each word arriving like a hammer blow. Convoy Delta 12, contact lost. Widow's Ridge, grid November 7. Alpha, whiteout conditions, zero communication. 42 personnel unaccounted for. Avalanche risk critical. Repeat, 42 personnel. The words hung there, burning into retinas, impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the crowd, someone dropped their duffel. The sound of heavy canvas hitting concrete seemed louder than it should have been. 42, not a number. Burma, not a statistic. 42 heartbeats, 42 names on roster sheets, 42 people who woke up this morning expecting to see tomorrow. Near the operations building, officers appeared in rapid succession. A captain, moving fast, radio already at his ear. A warrant officer pulling on cold weather gear while running. An operations NCO carrying a tablet, fingers swiping through screens, trying to find answers that weren't loading fast enough. Someone near Sarah spoke, voice thin with disbelief. They cleared that road this morning. How is it down again? Another voice, older, steadier. Widow's Ridge doesn't care about clearance. Weather changes, ground shifts. That's why they call it Widows. The name carried history. Widow's Ridge wasn't official designation, wasn't on any map the Army published. But every soldier who trained at Fort Carson knew it. The stretch of mountain road that connected the northern training grounds to the main base. 12 miles of switchbacks and blind curves carved into terrain that shifted with temperature and season. In summer, it was manageable. In winter, it was a predator. The ridge had killed people before, not many, enough. The captain from operations, a man named Morrison, appeared near the terminal entrance. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. His voice carried the particular strain of someone delivering news he doesn't want to believe. We have lost contact with the convoy Delta 12. Last known position was grid November 7 Alpha, approximately 8 miles up Widow's Ridge. Weather has deteriorated to whiteout conditions. Visibility estimated at less than 10 feet. All aerial support is grounded. Ground rescue is staging, but cannot navigate without guidance. Someone in the crowd called out, "What do they need?" Morrison's jaw tightened. They need eyes. They need someone who knows that terrain well enough to guide them through zero visibility. They need an Overwatch qualified spotter with experience in extreme cold weather operations. Silence followed. Not peaceful silence. The kind that grows heavy because nobody wants to be the one to say the obvious. Finally, a lieutenant spoke up, his voice carrying from the operations doorway. "Sir, all Overwatch designated personnel are forward deployed. We have no qualified snipers on base. The last one rotated to Germany 2 weeks ago." Morrison closed his eyes briefly, the gesture of a man doing math he doesn't want to finish. Without guidance, they're driving blind. The road narrows past the second switchback. There's a 500-foot drop on the left. If they veer wrong, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Everyone understood. 42 people in vehicles on ice in darkness with a cliff on one side and unstable snow shelf on the other. Without someone to mark the path, to fire guidance rounds, to turn invisible terrain into navigable space, those 42 heartbeats had maybe 90 minutes before hypothermia or avalanche or simple gravity made decisions for them. Sarah stood near her stack of luggage and felt the brown paper package grow heavier in her hand. She was 13 feet from the bus, had her ticket ready, had 4 years of absence to make up for, had a mother waiting who'd already lost a husband and didn't deserve to lose a daughter to someone else's emergency. The smart play was obvious. Board the bus. Let someone else handle this. She wasn't on duty, wasn't in the chain of command, had medical restrictions in her file, paperwork that said cold weather operations were contraindicated due to previous injury. Nobody would blame her for leaving. Nobody except the part of herself that was still Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie, youngest soldier in Army history to make that rank at 28, who'd once held Overwatch command for operations across 3 continents, who'd earned the call sign Ghost not because she was quiet, but because she never missed. The woman who existed before Widow's Ridge took everything from her. Corporal Webb's voice cut through her thoughts. Where's the admin queen going? Probably to file a report about the siren being too loud. His friends laughed. Someone made a joke about her needing earplugs for the bus ride. Sarah turned away from the buses. She didn't make an announcement, didn't raise her hand or request permission, didn't explain to anyone what she was doing or why. She simply walked, boot heels on concrete, steady pace, moving against the flow of everyone else who was trying to get closer to the warmth of the terminal and away from whatever crisis was unfolding. Someone near the buses noticed. Hey, where's she? The question trailed off, unanswered and unimportant. Sarah walked past the operations building, past the officers huddled over tablets and radios, past the growing crowd of soldiers trying to understand what was happening. She walked with purpose but without urgency, like someone who'd already made a decision and saw no point in broadcasting it. The armory sat 200 yards from the main terminal, a low concrete building with narrow windows and lights that stayed on 24 hours because readiness doesn't sleep. Sarah pushed through the heavy door into air that smelled like gun oil and metal and the particular mustiness of weapon cleaning patches. Behind the cage, Sergeant Major Bill Hutchins looked up from paperwork. He was 60 years old, built like a fence post, gray hair cut to stubble, face lined in ways that spoke of too many years in too many places. Vietnam veteran, 2 tours, earned a Silver Star in Hugh City and never talked about it. The kind of NCO who'd seen enough that very little surprised him anymore. He looked at Sarah and his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, recognition. Help you, Sergeant? Sarah reached into her wallet and pulled out a card. Not her current ID, an old one. Laminated military identification from 4 years ago, before the demotion, before the medical separation paperwork, before everything fell apart. She slid it across the counter without comment. Hutchins picked it up, scanned it through the reader. The computer screen flickered to life. Green text on black background, scrolling through database entries, pulling up records that should have been archived, deactivated, filed away into history. The screen stopped. MacKenzie, Sarah Jane, Master Sergeant E8, Most 11B Infantry, 19 Cavalry Scout. Additional qualification, Tier 1 Overwatch Sniper. Designation, Falcon Actual. Call sign, Ghost. Status, separated, non-combat administrative. Hutchins stared at the screen for 10 full seconds. His hand, weathered and scarred from decades of weapon handling, moved to his mouth. He rubbed his jaw slowly. Your Ghost. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. The ghost of Widow's Ridge. Sarah didn't confirm or deny. Didn't need to. The screen did that for her. Hutchins stood slowly, like movement required consideration. He walked to the cage without another word, unlocked it with keys that jangled against his belt. The sound of metal on metal echoed in the empty armory. He disappeared into the weapon racks, moving past standard-issue M4s, past squad automatic weapons, past grenade launchers and shotguns. He went to the back corner where the precision rifles lived, the ones that required special authorization, special training, special everything. He returned carrying a black hard case, foam-lined, custom-fitted. Set it on the counter with the care usually reserved for religious artifacts. Opened it. Inside, nested in cut foam, lay an M2010 enhanced sniper rifle. Bolt action, suppressed, long-range capable. The barrel showed wear from use, but maintenance from respect. Someone had kept this weapon ready, even though it hadn't been fired in 4 years. Engraved on the stock, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a serial number. Ghost 1, her rifle, the one assigned to her during Operation Frozen Dagger. The one the Army should have re-signed after she was separated. The one that should have been in some other sniper's hands by now. But here it was, waiting. Hutchins pushed the case toward her. Everyone said you were washed up, that you'd lost your nerve, that Widow's Ridge broke you. Sarah lifted the rifle from its case. The weight was familiar. Muscle memory kicked in, hands finding positions they'd held 1,000 times. Bolt, magazine well, trigger guard, scope mount. I never believed it, Hutchins continued. I was there when they brought you down from that ridge 4 years ago, saw what you looked like, what you'd been through, and I thought anyone who survives that isn't broken. They're forged. Sarah checked the bolt action. Smooth, no catch. Someone had maintained this weapon like it might be needed again. 42 people up there, she said quietly. First words she'd spoken since entering the armory. Hutchins nodded. Same ridge that took your team. Same ridge. You don't have to do this. You're on leave. Medical restrictions in your file. Nobody would blame you for walking away. Sarah loaded the magazine. 5 rounds. Federal gold medal match. 300 Win Mag. She chambered one, felt the bolt lock home with that particular sound that means readiness. I would, she said. Hutchins studied her face for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He came to attention, brought his right hand up in a salute, slow, deliberate, the kind of salute that carries meaning beyond regulation. Give them hell, Master Sergeant. Sarah looked at him. Didn't return the salute. Couldn't. She wasn't that person anymore. Wasn't the soldier who deserved that kind of respect. She was just someone who knew terrain and had a weapon and couldn't live with herself if she got on that bus. She slung the rifle across her back, secured the strap, turned toward the door. Hutchins called after her. Ghost. She stopped. Didn't turn around. You come back from that ridge, you hear me? You come back. Sarah pushed through the door into snow that had thickened while she was inside. Wind hit her face like a slap. Cold that went straight through fleece and into bone. Behind her, in the terminal, buses were still boarding, families still hugging goodbye. Corporal Webb probably still running his mouth about admin soldiers and their incompetence. Ahead of her, in the darkness beyond the base lights, Widow's Ridge waited. Sarah walked toward it. The operations center had become organized chaos by the time Sarah passed its exterior. Through windows, she could see officers bent over topographic maps, radios crackling with static and fragments of transmission. Someone was on a sat phone, voice raised, arguing with weather forecasting about visibility projections. Another officer worked a keyboard, trying to establish contact with the convoy through every available frequency. Nothing worked. Convoy Delta 12 had gone dark 8 miles up a mountain road in conditions that made communication impossible and navigation suicidal. Inside that operations center, a conversation was happening that would matter very much in about 11 minutes. Colonel James Rutherford stood at the map table, both hands pressed flat against laminated topography. He was 58 years old, son of a Korean War Medal of Honor recipient, career officer who'd spent 34 years learning that sometimes the right decision and the easy decision lived on opposite sides of a chasm. His nephew, Private First Class Daniel Rutherford, was somewhere in Convoy Delta 12, 20 years old, first deployment cycle, kid who joined because Grandpa's legacy meant something and Dad's expectations meant more. James had pulled strings to keep the kid stateside for winter training instead of shipping to Germany with his unit. Thought Fort Carson was safer. Thought Colorado mountains in December were preferable to Eastern European uncertainty. Thought wrong. Major Richard Cross stood across the table, operations officer, 45 years old, ambitious in ways that made him good at logistics and terrible at leadership. He had the kind of face that looked sympathetic, but never quite reached sincere. Sir, we should hold position and wait for weather to clear. Ground rescue without guidance is too risky. Rutherford didn't look up from the map. 42 soldiers don't have time to wait for weather, Major. Hypothermia timeline in these conditions is 4 hours. We're already 90 minutes in. Cross shifted weight, uncomfortable. Sir, we have no qualified Overwatch personnel. Every designated sniper is forward deployed. Without guidance capabilities, we can't. Then find me someone who knows that terrain. Cross opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Sir, the only person who ever operated successfully on Widow's Ridge in winter conditions was... He stopped. Rutherford looked up. Was who, Major? Cross's face did something complicated. Was Master Sergeant MacKenzie. But she's been separated for 4 years. Medical restrictions. Command negligence finding in her file. Where is she now? Cross checked his tablet. According to departure roster, she was cleared for New Year's leave. Should be on a bus to Denver by now. Should be. The words hung there. A specialist working the thermal monitoring station spoke up, voice uncertain. Sir, I have movement on the southern access road. Single person, moving toward the ridge base. Rutherford moved to the thermal screen. What kind of movement? Specialist zoomed in, tactical pace, carrying what looks like a long rifle case. They're not heading away from the ridge. They're heading toward it. Cross leaned in, squinting at the green and black thermal image. Who the hell would... His voice died. Rutherford's expression changed. Pull up recent armory access logs. The specialist typed fast. One entry, 23:15 hours. Hutchins signed out one 2010 ESR 2. His voice trailed off. To Master Sergeant MacKenzie. Authorization code Ghost 1. The operations center went quiet enough to hear ventilation systems breathing. Cross found his voice first. That's impossible. She doesn't have active clearance. Hutchins had no authority to... Rutherford cut him off with a look that could have flash frozen water. Major Cross, I don't care about authorization paperwork right now. What I care about is that someone who knows Widow's Ridge just armed themselves and started walking toward it. Which means either we have a soldier with a death wish, or we have the only person on this base who might be able to guide Delta 12 home. But sir, Cross stammered. Her file, the investigation, the finding of command negligence. 4 years ago, Rutherford said quietly, Master Sergeant MacKenzie lost her entire team on Widow's Ridge during Operation Frozen Dagger. The investigation blamed her. You testified against her. Said she made poor tactical decisions. Said she positioned her team in an avalanche zone against advice. Cross went pale. Sir, I was operations officer. I provided testimony based on... On what, Major? On the fact that you ordered her team onto that ridge? On the fact that you overrode her objections about snow stability? Cross swallowed hard. Sir, that's not... Rutherford leaned across the table. I've read the classified after-action reports, all of them, including the ones you thought stayed buried. I know what really happened up there. And I know that woman walking toward Widow's Ridge right now is going back to the place that destroyed her. To save people she doesn't know. For an army that blamed her for someone else's mistakes. The operations center had gone completely silent. Every person in the room was listening now. So here's what's going to happen, Rutherford continued. We are going to provide Master Sergeant MacKenzie with every resource she needs. Weather updates, communication support, ground rescue coordination, and you, Major Cross, are going to stay out of her way. Am I clear? Cross nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Get me a direct radio link to her position. And somebody find out where the hell Sergeant Major Hutchins is. Back at the terminal, Corporal Marcus Webb was watching the emergency boards, still not understanding why his leave was being delayed. Around him, other soldiers were starting to realize buses weren't leaving anytime soon. Not with 42 personnel missing. Not with the base on emergency status. Marcus noticed a senior NCO, a gray-haired sergeant major walking past with unusual purpose. That was Hutchins, Vietnam vet, legend in the NCO Corps, man who never moved fast unless something important was happening. Marcus called out, Sergeant Major, what's going on? Are we still departing? Hutchins stopped, looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed contempt and pity. You're the one who was running his mouth about the logistics sergeant, calling her an admin queen. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Yeah, I was just talking about a soldier you know nothing about, Hutchins finished. Let me tell you something, Corporal. That woman you mocked, she just walked off this base alone into the worst conditions I've seen in 40 years to save 42 lives. While you stand here worried about your bus schedule. Marcus started to respond, but Hutchins wasn't finished. Her name is Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie. Call sign, Ghost. She has more confirmed kills than you have days in service. She once held Overwatch command for operations across 3 continents. And 4 years ago, on the ridge she's walking toward right now, she lost her entire team, but stayed on position for 9 hours, hypothermic and bleeding, guiding 40 personnel to safety before she collapsed. Hutchins stepped closer. The Army blamed her. demoted her, separated her with a finding of command negligence. And she accepted it without fight because she believed it was her fault. Spent 4 years pushing paperwork, listening to soldiers like you make jokes about her competence, never once correcting them, never once telling them who she really was. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. And tonight, Hutchins continued, when she could have gotten on that bus and gone home to the mother who's been waiting 4 years for her to come back, she turned around, walked into an armory, picked up a rifle she hasn't touched since the worst night of her life, and headed back to the place that destroyed her. Because that's what real soldiers do. Hutchins turned to walk away, then stopped. You want to be useful, Corporal? Start praying that woman makes it back. Because without her, 42 people freeze to death tonight, including some who spent the last hour sitting near you, laughing at jokes about her. Marcus looked around the terminal, saw other soldiers who'd heard the exchange, saw faces going pale with realization. Someone near the buses spoke up. Who was on convoy Delta 12? What units? The operations sergeant reading from his tablet. Mixed assignment, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Brigade, engineers mostly, Signal Corps, some medical. A private near Marcus went white. My platoon. Oh God, half my platoon is on that convoy. The weight of 42 lives settled over the terminal like snow accumulation. Not abstract anymore. Not statistics, names, faces, people they knew. People. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the base lights, climbing toward terrain that had already taken everything from her once, Sarah MacKenzie was the only thing standing between those 42 lives and the cold mathematics of exposure. The wind picked up as Sarah reached the base of Widow's Ridge. The road started here, paved for the first quarter mile before transitioning to graded gravel and eventually to whatever lay beneath snow that never fully melted between November and April. She'd walked this approach 4 years ago. Different season, same mountain. The terrain didn't change, only the people who tried to cross it. Her right knee was already aching, old injury announcing itself the way it always did when cold settled in. 4 years ago, debris from the avalanche had torn ligaments and cracked the patella. Surgery put it back together. Physical therapy taught her to walk again. But cold weather brought memory, sharp and insistent, with every step. She ignored it. The rifle across her back weighed 15 pounds with scope and suppressor attached. Barrel length made it awkward for walking, stock catching on her pack frame when she moved wrong. She'd carried this configuration for miles before. Could do it again. The brown paper package was still in her pocket, corners going soft from being held too long, from absorbing moisture from her hand, from existing in a world where good intentions met hard reality. Sorry, Mama. The words were quiet enough that wind took them before they fully formed. Sarah began to climb. The first quarter mile was easy. Gradual incline, wide road, nothing technical. This was the part civilians could handle, where weekend hikers parked their Subarus and took photos of mountain vistas before heading back to Boulder or Denver or wherever people went when mountains were recreation instead of enemy terrain. Past the quarter mile, character changed. The road narrowed. My dog. Switchbacks began, tight angles that required attention even in good conditions. The left side dropped away into darkness, a slope that started gradual and became vertical about 50 feet down. In daylight, you could see the bottom. At night, in snow, depth was suggestion and gravity was certainty. Sarah's breathing settled into rhythm. 4 steps inhale, 4 steps exhale. Cold air burning in lungs, body heat building inside layers that would turn sweat into liability if she pushed too hard. Pacing mattered on mountains. Too fast, you arrived exhausted. Too slow, you arrived dead. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. 4 years ago, this same ridge, Sarah had been 28 years old and absolutely certain she knew what she was doing. Master Sergeant at an age when most soldiers were still figuring out Staff Sergeant. Tier 1 Overwatch designation. Falcon Actual, youngest woman to hold that call sign in the program's history. Pride and competence looked identical until they didn't. Operation Frozen Dagger was supposed to be routine. Training exercise. Simulated convoy under simulated threat on terrain that qualified as realistic cold weather operations. 40 vehicles, 80 personnel. Sarah's Overwatch team positioned on the ridge to provide guidance, mark hazards, ensure safety. Her team, Sergeant First Class Tommy Vega, 25 years old, best spotter she'd ever worked with, could read wind like it was written language, Had a laugh that carried across mountainsides and made difficult days manageable. Called her Ghost not as call sign, but as nickname, like they were friends instead of ranks. Specialist Linda Hayes, 23, communications specialist. Pregnant, though she'd kept it secret because pregnancy meant medical separation and she needed 6 more months to qualify for full benefits. Sarah had known anyway, had promised to keep the secret. Sergeant Robert Chen, 31, combat medic, called Doc by everyone. Had a daughter named Emma, 8 years old, sent him drawings every week. He kept them folded in his helmet. Private First Class Michael Torres, 19, security, first deployment cycle. Kid who still wrote letters home by hand because his grandmother didn't do email. 4 people who trusted Sarah to keep them safe. Major Richard Cross had ordered them onto the eastern slope of Widow's Ridge, despite Sarah's objection about snowpack stability. She'd pushed back once. He'd overridden her. She'd obeyed because that's what good soldiers did. At 0632 hours, an IED training charge detonated 4 minutes early. The avalanche that followed buried her entire team under 40 feet of snow. Sarah had been thrown clear by the initial blast. Woke up 2 hours later to silence and white and the terrible understanding that everyone she was responsible for was gone. Linda Hayes died first. Crushed pelvis, internal bleeding, miscarried in Tommy Vega's arms while Sarah dug frantically 30 feet away. Tommy held her and whispered things Sarah couldn't hear through snow and distance. Doc Chen died second. Compound fractures in both legs, infection from bone-penetrating skin, went septic, died delirious, calling for his daughter Emma. Michael Torres was killed instantly. Never knew what happened. 18 feet of snow and a boulder the size of a compact car. Tommy Vega survived longest. 4 days in an air pocket created by overturned vehicle debris. Sarah had been medevac by then. Hypothermic, frost damage. In surgery when Tommy finally stopped breathing. Or so the death certificate said. The investigation that followed blamed Sarah for poor tactical positioning. Major Cross testified that he'd advised against the eastern slope, that Sarah had insisted, that her judgment was impaired by ambition, by wanting to look capable, by youth and arrogance. She hadn't defended herself, hadn't fought the findings, accepted demotion to E5, accepted medical separation, accepted the conclusion that she'd killed 4 people through negligence. Believed it, spent 4 years believing it, and now she was walking back to the place where it happened. Rifle on her back, package in her pocket, breath forming clouds that disappeared into darkness. Her radio crackled. She'd taken one from the armory, clipped to her vest, volume low. Unknown station. This is Carson Actual. Identify yourself. Sarah recognized the voice. Colonel Rutherford, senior officer, good reputation, fair man. She didn't respond. The radio tried again. Station ascending Widow's Ridge South approach. You are advised that terrain ahead is unstable. Avalanche conditions critical. Recommend you abort ascent and return to base. Sarah kept walking. 3rd attempt. Master Sergeant MacKenzie, if that's you, please respond. We can provide weather support, communication relay, ground coordination. But we need confirmation of your position and intent. Sarah stopped walking, stood in darkness and snow and cold that was turning her fingers numb inside gloves that were rated for 20 below, but never actually kept fingers warm at 20 below. She pulled the radio from its clip, keyed the mic. Carson Actual, Ghost. Radio silence unless emergency. MacKenzie out. She turned the radio volume down to minimum and kept climbing. Behind her, in the operations center, Colonel Rutherford looked at the radio in his hand like it had just spoken prophecy. She's up there. He said it to the room. She's actually doing it. Major Cross, standing in the corner, looked like he was watching his past catch up with his present. The specialist at the thermal monitor spoke up. Sir, I'm tracking her position. She's maintaining steady pace. Current altitude 4,200 feet. Widow's Ridge Overwatch point is at 5,100. She's got 900 feet of vertical to cover. How long? In these conditions? Specialist did math. 45 minutes to an hour. If she doesn't fall, if she doesn't collapse from hypothermia, if the route stays accessible. And convoy Delta 12, last thermal reading showed them stopped at grid November 7. That's the second switchback. They've got maybe 600 yards to the first safe pullout. But between here and there, the specialist zoomed the topographic map. Between here and there is the narrows. Road width decreases to single lane, 500-foot drop on the left. unstable snow shelf on the right. If they move without guidance, they either go over the edge or trigger avalanche. Either way, 42 people die. Rutherford stared at the map, and she knows this terrain. Better than anyone alive, Cross said quietly. Sir, she spent 9 months training on Widow's Ridge before Frozen Dagger. She can navigate that terrain in the dark, has done it before. Then why did you testify she made poor decisions? Cross was silent for a long time, then barely audible, because I needed someone to blame besides myself. The operations center heard it. Nobody responded. What was there to say? Rutherford turned back to the map. Get me direct line to convoy Delta 12, and somebody monitoring Ghost's position continuously. If she falls, if she stops, if anything changes, I want to know immediately. Yes, sir. The colonel looked at the thermal image of a single person climbing through snow toward terrain that had already taken her team, her rank, her identity, and 4 years of her life. Come on, Master Sergeant, he whispered. Show us what ghost really means. Sarah reached the halfway point at 0014 hours. Her watch glowed faint green in the darkness. 44 minutes since she'd left the armory, lungs burning, knee grinding, right hand starting to lose fine motor control from cold. She stopped long enough to check her rifle. Scope caps clear. Bolt action smooth, magazine seated, suppressor tight. Through the scope, even in darkness, she could see thermal differential. Warmer air rising from valley below. Colder air settling from peaks above. Snow moving in patterns that told stories about wind speed and direction. This was what Overwatch meant. Not just shooting, understanding terrain like it was text, reading weather like it was language, becoming part of the mountain instead of fighting it. Tommy had taught her that. Stop trying to dominate the ridge, Ghost. Let it teach you. His voice was so clear in her memory, it felt like he was standing beside her. She shook her head. Cleared the thought. Grief was luxury she couldn't afford right now. Continued climbing. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees as altitude increased. Her breath came in shorter clouds now, body working harder to process oxygen that thinned with every 100 feet of elevation. Ahead, through snow and darkness, she could see the ridge crest. Not the summit, the operational position. Overwatch Point Delta, the exact location where her team had been positioned 4 years ago. The place where everything ended. Sarah's hands started shaking. Not from cold, from memory. She forced them still, kept walking. And somewhere 8 miles ahead, in vehicles that had gone dark and cold, 42 people waited for a miracle they didn't know was coming. Sarah reached Overwatch Point Delta at 0047 hours. The climb had taken 33 minutes from the halfway mark. Her lungs burned with the particular fire that comes from pushing hard at altitude in cold that turns oxygen into knives. Each breath scraped going in, burned coming out, left frost on the inside of her balaclava where moisture met sub-zero air. The point itself was exactly as she remembered. A natural shelf of rock jutting from the mountainside, wide enough for 3 people to lie prone with equipment, elevated enough to provide sight lines down the entire valley approach. 4 years ago, 5 soldiers had positioned here. Tonight, 1 returned. Sarah dropped to her knees in snow that came up to mid-thigh. Her right leg gave out slightly, old injury making itself known, but she caught herself with the rifle stock. Stayed down for 30 seconds, letting heart rate settle, letting vision adjust to the particular darkness that exists above treeline, where ambient light has nothing to reflect from except snow and skyline. The wind had teeth up here. Not the steady push from the valley, but chaotic gusts that changed direction without warning, that could alter bullet trajectory by inches at range, that carried sound away before it fully formed. She'd need to account for that. Every shot would require reading wind in real time, making adjustments that lived more in instinct than calculation. She unslung the rifle and set it carefully in the snow, pulled her pack around, opened the main compartment. Inside were things she'd grabbed from the armory without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over when decisions became automatic. Shooting mat, spotting scope, rangefinder, ammunition, a small foam pad that would keep her body heat from melting snow beneath her and soaking through in the minutes between shots. And at the bottom of the pack, wrapped in an old t-shirt, a pair of shooting gloves. Sarah pulled them out slowly. The right glove had a tear along the trigger finger seam. 4 years old, never repaired. The fabric was stiff from being stored folded, creased in ways that held the shape of her hand even when empty. She turned the right glove inside out. Written in faded permanent marker in handwriting she recognized immediately were initials. TV, DC, LH, MT, Tommy Vega, Doc Chen, Linda Hayes, Michael Torres. Her team, her dead, the people she'd failed. Below the initials, in her own handwriting, 2 words, never again. She'd written that 4 years ago, 3 days after the funeral she hadn't been allowed to attend because she was still in ICU. Written it with her left hand because her right was bandaged from frostbite damage. Written it as promise or threat or prayer, she still wasn't sure which. Never again would she lead people into danger. Never again would she trust her own judgment. Never again would she put on the uniform and pretend she deserved to. And yet here she was. Sarah pulled the gloves on. The tear in the trigger finger opened wider as her hand filled the space. Cold air touched skin through the gap. She could feel it exactly where the fabric separated, a line of ice against the knuckle. Good. Pain helped with focus. She set up the rifle on its bipod, positioning it to cover the approach road 800 meters downslope. Through the scope, even in near total darkness, thermal differential made terrain visible. Warmer air rising from the valley created shimmer against colder snow. Vehicle engines would show up as bright spots against all that white. If the convoy was still moving, if they hadn't already gone over the edge, if 42 people weren't already past saving. Sarah's radio crackled at minimum volume. She kept it on despite her request for silence because completely cutting communication was stupidity masquerading as independence. Ghost, Carson Actual. Convoy Delta 12 has stopped moving. Last thermal shows them at grid November 7, second switchback. They are not responding to radio contact. Weather is degrading, visibility at their position estimated 0. They are driving blind. Sarah keyed the mic. Rules of engagement? Carson Actual paused. Then Colonel Rutherford's voice came back, slower, heavier. You are authorized to use any means necessary to guide them to safety. Ballistic markers, tracer rounds, whatever you need. Ground rescue is staging at base of ridge, but cannot ascend without your guidance. 42 lives are depending on you making shots we can't even see. Sarah looked through her scope at terrain she knew better than any map could show. The second switchback was the beginning of the kill zone, where the road narrowed to barely 2 vehicle widths, where the left side dropped 500 feet into darkness, where snow accumulated on the right in formations that looked stable until weight or vibration or simple bad luck triggered collapse. She'd positioned her team here 4 years ago because it offered perfect overwatch of the entire approach. Major Cross had ordered them 200 meters further east, onto slope that looked identical, but carried different snow density, different substrate stability, different risk profile. She'd objected once. He'd overridden her. She'd obeyed. And when the avalanche came, it took everything. Sarah pushed the memory down, locked it away. Memories were quicksand. Step in them and you stop moving. Stop moving on a mountain in winter and you died. Understood Carson Actual. Beginning guidance sequence. Ghost out. She settled into position. Body flat against the shooting mat. Left elbow under the rifle stock. Right hand finding the grip with that particular pressure that meant ready. Eye to scope. Breathing settled into the rhythm every sniper learns. In for 4 heartbeats. Hold for 2. Out for 4. Hold for 2. In the space between heartbeats, the world becomes very simple. There is target. There is distance. There is wind. There is trigger. Everything else is noise. Sarah found the convoy through thermal imaging. 6 vehicles stopped in formation, engines still running, heat signatures showing personnel inside. They'd pulled into a rough cluster, probably hoping proximity would provide some kind of psychological comfort against the white nothing surrounding them. She ranged the distance to the lead vehicle. 680 meters, wind gusting from northwest, speed varying between 8 and 12 knots, temperature minus 15 Fahrenheit, barometric pressure dropping, which meant the storm was intensifying. The math ran automatically. Elevation difference, air density, Coriolis effect at this latitude, spin drift on the bullet. Her brain processed variables that had been drilled into muscle memory through 10,000 practice rounds and 300 combat shots across 2 deployments. She loaded the rifle. Federal gold medal match, 300 Winchester Magnum, 190 grain. The round seated with a sound like finality. Bolt forward, locked, safety off. First shot was always the hardest, not technically, psychologically, Because once you fired, you committed. No more planning, no more consideration, just action and consequence. Sarah's finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure separated intent from execution. She thought about this brown paper package in her pocket, her mother waiting. 4 years of absence that one more night wouldn't fix but might forgive. Then she thought about 42 people in those vehicles, 42 names on roster sheets, 42 families who wanted their soldiers home. She thought about Tommy Vega holding Linda Hayes while she bled out, about Doc Chen calling for his daughter Emma in delirium, about Michael Torres who never got to write his grandmother another letter, about promises written in marker on torn gloves. Never again. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with suppressed recoil that sounded like hard cough rather than explosion. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, spinning, tracking through cold air that tried to push it sideways, dropping according to physics and rising according to hope. 680 meters downrange, the bullet struck a metal road marker with a sound like a bell made of light. Sparks flew, brief, bright, unmistakable. In the lead vehicle of convoy Delta 12, Captain Derek Morrison saw the flash through snow that had reduced visibility to the length of his hood. His foot came off the brake instinctively. Heart rate spiked, hands tightened on the wheel. His driver, a specialist named Chen, pointed. "Sir, did you see that?" Morrison grabbed his radio. "All Delta units, hold position. Someone just fired near our location." His second in command, a lieutenant named Patricia Wells, came back over comms. Could be debris, could be ice breaking. Morrison watched the exact spot where the spark had appeared. Watched for movement, for follow-up, for anything that would explain what he'd just seen. 10 seconds later, another spark. Same location, same brief flash of light against white. "That's not debris," Morrison said. "Someone is shooting at that marker. Deliberately." "But sir," Wells responded, "we're in training exercise. No live fire authorized. Who would be—" She stopped because the answer was obvious and impossible. Someone who knew they were here. Someone who could see them when they couldn't see anything. Someone who was trying to tell them something. Morrison made a decision that would either save 42 lives or kill them all. "All units," he said into the radio, "we're going to follow those sparks. Driver, when you see the next flash, turn left exactly 5 degrees, slow and steady. Don't overcorrect." "Sir," his driver said, "we can't see the road. If we turn left, we might go over the edge, might trigger an avalanche, might die." Morrison knew. But sitting still in degrading weather with fuel running low and hypothermia timeline ticking down was death with certainty instead of probability. "I know, specialist, but whoever's up there is trying to guide us. We either trust them or we freeze." The driver's hands were shaking on the wheel. "Yes, sir." They waited. Sarah fired her second shot 8 seconds after the first. The bullet struck the same marker from a slightly different angle, creating spark pattern that looked like direction rather than random impact. She was painting arrows with gunfire, creating navigation from violence, turning her weapon into language. Through the scope, she watched the lead vehicle's headlights shift. Slight adjustment. 5 degrees left, exactly what she'd indicated. They were listening, they were following, they trusted her. The weight of that trust was heavier than the rifle. Sarah chambered her third round and began working the problem that would define the next 90 minutes. She needed to guide 6 vehicles through 1,200 meters of terrain that included 3 switchbacks, 2 narrow sections, 1 ice bridge, and uncountable places where wrong decisions measured in inches would result in deaths measured in dozens. She had 15 rounds in her pack, maybe 20 shots total if she was perfect with her reloads. That meant every round had to count. Every spark had to communicate exact information. Every decision had to be right. No pressure. Sarah's hands started shaking. Not from cold, from the memory of other shots, other decisions, other times when she'd been certain she was right and ended up catastrophically wrong. She forced her hands still, breathed, found the rhythm again. Shot 3. Boulder Edge 400 meters closer, marking where the road curved sharp right. The convoy would need to know that turn was coming because in zero visibility, sharp turns were guesswork and guesswork killed. The round hit stone and sparked bright. Sarah watched the convoy adjust trajectory, beginning a gentle right curve that would position them for the switchback. Shot 4. Tree trunk at the switchback apex, the tightest part of the turn, where the road was narrowest and the drop was steepest. Hit it low to indicate slow down. Hit it high to indicate floor it. She hit it center mass, translation, steady as she goes. The convoy crawled through the turn like they were navigating minefield, which effectively they were. One vehicle slipped slightly, tires finding ice under snow, but recovered. Morrison's voice came over the radio, calm despite circumstances, telling his drivers to maintain spacing, maintain speed, maintain faith. Sarah was 4 shots in when her radio crackled with a voice she didn't expect. Ghost, this is Sergeant Major Hutchins. I'm in Operations Center. I can see thermal of your position and convoy position. You're doing it. You're bringing them through. Sarah didn't respond, couldn't spare the attention. She was already lining up shot 5. Hutchins continued, I know you can hear me even if you're not talking, so I'm going to tell you something. 40 years ago, I was in a place like this. Fire base in the Central Highlands. Surrounded, low on ammunition, down to 3 days of water, and someone I'd never met, some forward air controller I couldn't even see, talked a medevac through conditions that should have been impossible. Saved 63 of us. Sarah chambered the next round. Let Hutchins talk. Sometimes voices help maintain focus. Sometimes they were just company against the dark. I never got to thank that controller, Hutchins said. Never knew his name, but I promised myself that if I ever saw someone else doing the impossible, I'd tell them what it meant. So here it is, Ghost, what you're doing right now, guiding people you've never met through terrain that already took everything from you. That's not duty. That's not orders. That's character. That's the kind of soldier that makes old men like me believe this army still means something. Sarah's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, focused on the scope. Shot 5. Ice bridge spanning a crevasse. The convoy would need to cross it, needed to know it was there, needed to understand the risk. She aimed for the far support, where ice met rock. The spark would indicate location and stability. The round hit perfectly. She watched the lead vehicle slow almost to stop, driver probably arguing with Morrison about whether that spark meant cross here or avoid here. Morrison made the right call. They crossed, one vehicle at a time, slow enough that ice creaked but didn't crack. All 6 made it. Sarah exhaled. 6 shots down, 9 rounds left in the magazine, 6 in reserve. The convoy was halfway through the kill zone, but the worst was still ahead. The Narrows, where the road pinched to barely 2 vehicle widths and the avalanche slope loomed on the right like a held breath waiting to release. She was lining up shot 7 when her scope picked up something that made her freeze. Movement. In the avalanche debris field, 400 meters downslope from her position, in the exact location where her team had been buried 4 years ago. Sarah's heart stopped. Actually stopped. Then restarted with a stutter that made her vision blur. Thermal signature. Human-sized, moving. Impossible. She adjusted the scope, zoomed in, told herself it was wildlife. A deer, an elk, anything except what her brain was screaming it might be. The signature moved again. Deliberate, not animal motion. Human, limping, using something for support. Sarah's hands started shaking so hard she had to pull away from the scope. She grabbed her rangefinder, aimed at the signature, got distance and rough size estimate. 170 pounds, 6 feet tall, moving with assistance. The exact profile of Sergeant First Class Tommy Vega. No, the word came out loud enough that she heard it over the wind. No, that's not possible. He's dead. They're all dead. I watched them bury the caskets. But thermal doesn't lie. Heat signature doesn't hallucinate. Something human-shaped and human-sized was moving in terrain where nothing should be alive. Sarah's radio crackled. Ghost, convoy is holding at the Narrows. They need guidance. What's your status? She couldn't answer, couldn't look away from that thermal signature. Couldn't process the possibility that maybe, impossibly, someone had survived 4 years in conditions that should have killed them in 4 days. Ghost, respond. Morrison's voice now coming through on the command channel. We need the next marker. We're sitting in the worst part of the road. We need to know which way to go. Sarah forced herself back to the rifle, back to the scope, back to the mission. 42 lives now. Ghost later. Her hands were still shaking when she fired shot 8. Barely hit the target, spark weak and off-center. But enough, the convoy moved. She fired shot 9. Better, marked the right boundary of safe passage. Shot 10, left boundary. The corridor was maybe 8 feet wide. Thread a needle in a hurricane. The convoy crawled through. First vehicle made it. Second, third. Fourth vehicle, a cargo truck carrying 8 personnel, slipped on ice. Sarah watched through the scope as the truck's rear wheels lost traction. Watched it start to slide sideways. Watched the driver overcorrect. Watched the truck begin to tip. She didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't do any of the things that made precision shooting precise. She just fired. Shot 11 hit the truck's doorframe. Not where she'd aimed, not where she'd intended. But the spark was bright enough and close enough that the driver saw it, jerked the wheel instinctively, and somehow, impossibly, the truck righted itself. Kept moving. All 8 people inside stayed alive. Sarah's magazine was empty. She dropped it, hands moving automatically through reload procedure drilled into muscle until it became reflex. Fresh magazine seated, bolt forward, round chambered. 5 shots left before she'd need to reload again. The convoy was through the Narrows. They had maybe 400 meters to the safe zone, but between here and there was the final test. The approach that had killed her team. The eastern slope. Sarah's radio came alive with Colonel Rutherford's voice. Ghost, weather is deteriorating rapidly. Ground rescue cannot ascend. Avalanche warning has been upgraded to critical. You have maybe 15 minutes before the entire slope becomes unstable. Get them out, now. Sarah looked through her scope at the eastern slope. Snow had accumulated since the last convoy passed through. New load on old stability. Temperature was dropping, which meant the snowpack was getting heavier, denser, more prone to fracture. She knew exactly how much weight that slope could hold before it failed, because she'd learned that lesson in blood 4 years ago. 6 vehicles times 8,000 pounds each. 48,000 pounds. The slope would hold 40,000, maybe. She keyed her radio. Morrison Ghost, you need to lighten your vehicles. Personnel dismount. Walk the final 400 meters. Vehicles proceed empty. Static. Then Morrison's voice uncertain. Ghost, it's minus 15 out here. Wind chill makes it minus 30. If we dismount, we're looking at frostbite in under 10 minutes. I know, but if you don't dismount, the slope fails and everyone dies. Your choice, Captain. More static. Sarah could hear Morrison talking to someone off radio. Probably his XO. Probably running the same math she'd just run and coming to the same terrible conclusion. Finally, Morrison came back. Roger, Ghost. We're dismounting. All personnel on foot. Vehicles proceed with drivers only. Sarah watched through thermal as doors opened and people spilled out into cold that would make exposed skin crystallize. 42 personnel became 42 heat signatures, walking in loose formation, hunched against wind, moving slowly through snow that came up past their knees. The vehicles now carrying only drivers began moving again, lighter, faster, crossing the eastern slope with speed that looked like confidence but was actually survival math. First vehicle made it across. Sarah breathed. Second vehicle, wheels slipping but finding traction, across. Third vehicle. Fourth. Fifth. Sarah was tracking the 6th vehicle, Morrison's command truck, when the slope spoke. Not a sound exactly. More like a frequency below hearing. Vibration that traveled through rock and snow and air. The kind of warning that makes animals run before earthquakes. Sarah knew that feeling, had felt it once before. 4 years ago, seconds before the world turned white and violent. She grabbed her radio. Avalanche! All personnel run. Vehicle 6, floor it. The slope fractured with a sound like the world breaking. Snow that had been solid became liquid in the span of a heartbeat. 40,000 pounds of accumulated winter began sliding downhill with momentum that erased everything in its path. The 6th vehicle accelerated. Driver probably had his foot through the floor, engine screaming, tires clawing for traction on surface that was already gone. Sarah watched the avalanche catch the rear bumper, watched snow pile against the tailgate, watched the truck start to spin. She fired. Shot 12, hit the truck's roof. The spark was meaningless as guidance, but absolute as message. I see you. You're not alone. Keep fighting. The driver must have seen it, must have understood, must have found something inside himself that refused to quit because the truck lunged forward, broke free of the snow wave, and crossed into safe ground with seconds to spare. Behind it, the eastern slope collapsed completely. The avalanche rolled downhill like slow-motion thunder, filling the space where the convoy had been 30 seconds earlier. If they'd still been there, If Sarah hadn't made them dismount, if Morrison hadn't listened, 42 people would be buried right now. Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle. Her breathing was ragged. Her vision kept blurring. She just relived the worst moment of her life and somehow, impossibly, changed the ending. Her radio erupted with the voices. Morrison confirming all personnel accounted for. Rutherford ordering ground rescue to advance now that the slope was cleared. Someone crying with relief. Someone else praying out loud. Sarah lowered the rifle and put her head down against the snow. Let herself shake. Let herself cry. Let herself be human for 30 seconds before she had to be a soldier again. When she looked up, the thermal signature in the debris field was closer, moving toward her position, still limping, still using support, still impossible. Sarah made a decision that would either answer questions that haunted her or prove that 4 years of guilt had finally broken her mind completely. She stood, slung the rifle, started descending toward the debris field. Her radio crackled. "Ghost, what are you doing? You need to hold position for debrief." Sarah turned the radio off. She walked through snow that tried to hold her in place, through cold that turned her breath to ice, through darkness that made every step an act of faith. Her knee was grinding. Her hands were numb. Her core temperature was dropping into ranges where decision-making became impaired. She didn't care if there was any chance, any possibility, any microscopic fraction of hope that someone from her team had survived. She had to know. The debris field looked different than she remembered. 4 years of weather had smoothed the sharp edges, filled in the crevasses, made the chaos look almost natural. But Sarah knew this ground, had crawled across it bleeding and screaming and searching for people who were already gone. The thermal signature stopped moving about 50 meters ahead. Sarah could see it now with her naked eye. Not just heat differential, but actual shape. A person, standing in shadow cast by overturned vehicle debris that had been buried and excavated and reburied by seasons of snowfall. Sarah stopped 20 feet away. The figure spoke, voice rough from disuse, quiet from uncertainty, but unmistakable. "Ghost? That really you?" Sarah's knees gave out. She went down in the snow like someone had cut her strings. The rifle slipped from her shoulder. Her vision tunneled. Because that voice was dead. That voice belonged to a casket buried in Fort Carson National Cemetery with full military honors and a folded flag given to parents who wept like the world was ending. The figure limped closer, moving with painful slowness. Sarah could see details now. Tattered cold weather gear held together with paracord and hope. Makeshift crutch carved from tree branch. Face hidden behind balaclava and frost-covered beard. The figure stopped 5 feet away, reached up with shaking hands, pulled the balaclava down. Face gaunt from starvation. Cheeks scarred from frostbite. Right eye clouded and sightless. Left ear missing. Just scar tissue where it should have been. But the shape of the jaw, the set of the mouth, the way he stood even broken and damaged. Sergeant First Class Tommy Vega, 29 years old, 4 years dead. Standing in front of her, alive. Sarah tried to speak, couldn't. Tried to stand, couldn't. Tried to process what she was seeing and failed completely. Tommy's good eye filled with tears. "Took you long enough," he whispered. "I've been waiting." Sarah's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Sound became distant, muffled, like hearing the world through water. Her body temperature had dropped below 94 degrees, hypothermia stage 2. The shaking that had racked her for the past hours suddenly stopped. Not because she was warming up, because her body was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core. She was dying, had maybe 10 minutes before it became irreversible. Tommy saw it, recognized the signs because he'd lived them himself more times than he could count over 4 years of barely surviving. He lowered her carefully into the snow, then shrugged out of his outer layer. Tattered, yes. Inadequate for normal use, yes. But it was one more barrier between her and the cold, and right now one more barrier was the difference between breathing and not. He wrapped it around her shoulders, pulled her against his chest, began the slow work of transferring what little body heat he had left to give. "Ghost," he said, voice rough against her ear. "You don't get to down. Not here. Not after what you just did. You hear me? You don't get to quit." Sarah's eyes fluttered. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Tommy kept talking, kept her conscious through force of will and memory of every time she'd done the same for him during training, when he wanted to quit, when the cold was too much, when his body screamed for rest. "Remember Fort Benning? You made me run that last mile when I was ready to drop. Said quitters don't get to wear the tab. Said I was stronger than I thought I was. Sarah's breathing was shallow, too shallow. Remember that op into the Hindu Kush? 40 below. Wind like knives. You stayed on glass for 16 hours. Wouldn't let me spell you because you said the shot was yours and you don't hand off your shots. A tiny response. Her hand moved slightly, fingers curling. That's it, Ghost. That's it. Stay with me. Ground rescue is coming. You just gotta hold on a little longer. He could hear engines now. Closer. The distinct rumble of military vehicles pushing through snow at speeds that balanced urgency against terrain. Sarah's eyes opened, focused on his face with effort that looked like lifting mountains. Tommy, she whispered, you're real. I'm real. They said you were dead. They said a lot of things. Most of them were wrong. Sarah's hand found his face, touched the scarred cheek, the missing ear, the blind eye. Her fingers were ice cold, but the gesture was warm. What happened to you? Tommy's good eye filled with tears that froze on his cheek before they could fall. I survived, Ghost. That's what happened. I survived because I knew you'd come back. Knew you wouldn't leave us here forever. Knew that eventually, somehow, you'd return. Sarah's breathing hitched. 4 years. You waited 4 years? Tommy nodded, didn't trust his voice. Sarah's other hand found the torn glove she was wearing, found the initials written there. TV, she looked at it, then at him, then back at the glove. I wrote your name, she said. Thought you were dead. Carried you anyway. Tommy's voice broke, and I waited. Carried the hope that you weren't broken, that the army didn't destroy you like they tried to. Behind them, headlights cut through the snow, voices shouting, medics running with equipment that jangled and thumped. Sergeant Major Hutchins reached them first, moving faster than a 60-year-old man should be able to move, carrying a thermal blanket and a medical kit that looked like it weighed half what he did. He stopped dead when he saw Tommy's face. Holy Mother of God, he breathed. Vega? Tommy Vega? Tommy looked up at him, face haggard in the portable lights the medics were setting up. Hey, Sergeant Major, long time no see. Hutchins dropped to his knees in the snow. Son, we buried you. Had a funeral. Your parents, I know, Tommy said quietly. I heard it on a radio I scavenged. Heard them eulogize me. Heard my mother crying. Heard everything. Hutchins' hands were shaking as he reached for his radio. Carson Actual, this is Hutchins. Confirm Sergeant First Class Thomas Vega is alive. Repeat, Vega is alive. 4 years in field. Critical condition, but conscious and coherent. Static. Then Colonel Rutherford's voice sounding like he'd been punched in the chest. Say again, Hutchins. Did you say alive? Alive, sir. God is my witness. He's sitting right here. The medics surrounded them both now. Too focused on Sarah, checking vitals, starting IV lines, wrapping her in warming blankets that used chemical heat packs to raise core temperature. 2 others approached Tommy with the caution usually reserved for handling explosives. Sir, the lead medic said gently, I'm Corporal Amanda Price. I'm going to check you over, okay? Can you tell me where you're injured? Tommy laughed. The sound was brittle and wrong, like something that had forgotten how to be humor. Where am I injured? He gestured at himself. Take your pick. Frostbite took my left ear. Infection took my right eye. Malnutrition took about 40 pounds. Left leg healed wrong from compound fracture. Right hand has nerve damage from using it to dig graves. The medic went pale. Graves? Tommy's face closed down. Linda Hayes, Doc Chen. I buried them myself. Day 2 and day 3. Nothing to dig with but my hands and a piece of broken metal. Took me 6 hours each. Ground was frozen. The clearing went silent except for wind and the hum of vehicle engines. Sarah, now wrapped in blankets and slightly more coherent, spoke from her position on the stretcher. Tommy, Linda and Doc, they're really gone. Tommy looked at her. His expression carried 4 years of grief compressed into a single moment. Linda died in my arms, Ghost. She was pregnant. Did you know that? Sarah's face crumpled. I knew. She lost the baby first, miscarried from the trauma, then bled out. Took about 4 hours. I tried, Ghost. I tried everything I knew, but there was too much damage and I didn't have equipment, and the cold just... He stopped, couldn't continue. Sarah was crying now, full sobs that shook her whole body. I'm sorry. God, Tommy, I'm so sorry. Doc lasted longer, Tommy continued, voice flat, reciting facts because emotion would break him. Made it to day 3, compound fractures in both legs. Bone came through the skin, went septic. He was delirious at the end. Kept calling for Emma, his daughter. kept asking if she was okay. The medics were crying now. Hardened combat veterans who'd seen everything war could do to human bodies, and they were crying. Michael Torres was already gone when I dug myself out, Tommy said. Boulder crushed him. He never felt anything. That's what I told myself, that he went fast. Hutchins had turned away, shoulders shaking. Sarah reached out from her stretcher, hand seeking Tommy's. He took it, held it like it was the only real thing in the world. I'm sorry I couldn't save them, he said. I tried. God knows I tried, but I couldn't. Sarah squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. You survived. That's what you did. You survived. Yeah, Tommy said, I survived. The medics began moving both of them toward the vehicles. Tommy needed to be carried, his leg too damaged to support weight on uneven ground. Sarah could walk with assistance, but the medics weren't taking chances with her core temperature. As they loaded them into the heated transport, Sarah grabbed Tommy's hand again. The others, she said. The convoy. Did they make it? All 42, Tommy answered. I watched you bring them through, watched every shot. You were perfect, Ghost. Just like old times. Sarah's eyes drifted closed. Not like old times, she murmured. Old times we lost people. This time everyone lived. Because you came back, Tommy said. Because you didn't let what happened to us stop you from saving them. The transport began moving, carefully navigating back down the mountain. Inside, wrapped in blankets and warming slowly, Sarah and Tommy sat in silence that carried 4 years of absence and 5 minutes of impossible reunion. Hutchins sat with them, radio in hand, updating Colonel Rutherford on their status. Sir, both stable. MacKenzie hypothermic, but responding to treatment. Vega, he paused, trying to find words. Vega is a medical miracle. 4 years of survival in conditions that should have killed him in 4 days. He's going to need extensive treatment. Kidney function questionable. Vision loss in right eye permanent. Hearing loss in left ear total. Musculoskeletal damage significant. Rutherford's voice came back. And his mental state? Hutchins looked at Tommy, who was staring out the window at terrain he'd called home for 4 years. Intact, sir. Traumatized, certainly. But intact. He's been waiting. All this time he's been waiting for Ghost to come back. The radio was silent for a moment. Then Rutherford again, voice thick. Get them to hospital. Both of them. Full medical workup. And Hutchins, when they're stable, I need to know everything. How Vega survived, why we never found him, all of it. Yes, sir. One more thing, Rutherford added. Someone needs to call Vega's parents. Tell them their son, who they buried 4 years ago, is alive. His voice broke slightly. I don't even know how to make that call. In the transport, Sarah had drifted into something between sleep and unconsciousness. Her hand was still holding Tommy's. Tommy looked down at their joined hands, at the torn glove with the initials, at the woman who'd carried his memory while he carried her hope. Never again, she'd written. And she'd kept that promise, brought 42 people home safe, didn't lose a single one. The transport hit a bump. Sarah stirred, eyes opening briefly. Tommy? Yeah? Thank you for waiting. Tommy's throat tightened. Thank you for coming back. The transport descended through snow that was easing now. Storm passing, visibility improving in that particular way that makes you realize how blind you'd been. Behind them on Widow's Ridge, the eastern slope lay quiet. Avalanche debris settled. Snow-covered tracks, wind-erased evidence. But 2 people had walked off that mountain alive who shouldn't have been there at all. One who'd climbed up to face her demons. One who'd climbed down after 4 years of waiting. And somewhere between departure and arrival, between guilt and redemption, between death and impossible survival, 42 other people continued breathing because of shots fired in darkness by someone the Army had forgotten. Someone who remembered anyway. Someone called Ghost. In the operations center, thermal monitors showed 2 signatures in the debris field, one prone, one kneeling beside it. Colonel Rutherford stared at the screen. Major Cross had gone pale. Sergeant Major Hutchins was already moving toward the door, grabbing cold weather gear, calling for medics. What the hell is happening up there? Rutherford demanded. The specialist working the thermal scope zoomed in, enhanced the image, ran identification protocols. Sir, he said, slowly. According to the system, that second signature matches biometric profile for Sergeant First Class Tommy Vega. Vega is dead, Cross said flatly. Died 4 years ago. We buried him. The specialist swallowed. Sir, the thermal signature is human. It's alive. And the biometric match is 97%. Rutherford grabbed his radio. Ground rescue, priority 1, 2 personnel in the debris field need immediate extraction. One is Master Sergeant MacKenzie. The other is, he paused, uncertain how to even say it. The other is possibly Sergeant Vega. Approach with extreme caution and prepare for medical emergency. The radio operator's voice came back confused. Sir, did you say Sergeant Vega? He's been dead for... I know what the files say. Rutherford cut him off. I also know what the thermal scan shows. Get up there, now. In the debris field, Tommy held Sarah's unconscious form and looked up at the ridge where she'd been positioned, where she'd fired 12 shots that saved 42 lives, where she'd come back to the place that destroyed her because that's what Ghost did. He'd watched the whole thing through a spotting scope he'd salvaged from the wreckage 4 years ago. Watched her set up, watched her shoot, watched her guide the convoy with precision that made him proud and heartbroken in equal measure. She never gave up, he said to the darkness. Even when the whole world told her she failed, she never stopped being the best of us. In the distance, he could hear engines, ground rescue ascending, medics coming, the world closing in after 4 years of isolation. Tommy looked down at Sarah's face, pale in the starlight, peaceful in unconsciousness. Welcome back to the land of the living, Ghost, he whispered. Both of us. And somewhere in Colorado Springs, Helen MacKenzie's phone rang with a call from Fort Carson that would explain why her daughter wasn't on the midnight bus. The call that would change everything. Again, the hospital lights were too bright. That was Sarah's first thought when consciousness returned in fragments, piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle from scattered memories. White ceiling tiles, beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic and heated air, the particular quality of silence that only exists in medical facilities at 3 in the morning when the world outside has stopped pretending to be awake. Her body felt heavy, disconnected, like it belonged to someone else, and she was just borrowing it temporarily. IV lines ran into her left arm. Warming blankets covered her to the chest. Her right hand was bandaged, white gauze wrapped around fingers that she could barely feel. Frostbite. She knew without asking, knew from experience what that particular numbness meant. A nurse appeared in her peripheral vision, young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and the efficient movements of someone who'd done this shift 1,000 times. Welcome back, Sergeant. You gave us a scare. Core temp was 91 when they brought you in, another degree lower, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Sarah's throat was dry. She tried to speak, but only managed to sound like gravel shifting. The nurse held a cup of water with a straw. Small sips. Your throat's raw from the breathing tube. Takes a while to feel normal again. Sarah drank. The water was room temperature, but felt like fire going down. She managed 2 words that mattered more than comfort. Tommy Vega. The nurse's expression shifted. Something complicated passed across her face. Relief mixed with disbelief, mixed with the particular look medical professionals get when they encounter something that breaks their understanding of possible. He's alive. 2 doors down. Critical condition, but stable. The doctors are... She paused, searching for words. They're still trying to understand how he survived 4 years in those conditions. Sarah's eyes closed. Not from exhaustion. From the weight of impossible reality settling into confirmed truth. Tommy was alive. Not a hallucination. Not a ghost. Not hypothermia-induced delusion. Alive! The nurse checked Sarah's vitals, made notes on a tablet, adjusted the IV drip. You should rest. Doctor wants to keep you under observation for at least 48 hours. Your kidney function is showing some stress, and we need to monitor for complications. Sarah's eyes opened. My kidney? The nurse looked confused. Yes, your left kidney is showing elevated markers, probably from the extreme cold exposure. We're monitoring it closely. Sarah filed that information away. Her body was telling her something, but she was too tired to interpret the message. Sleep pulled at her with insistence that felt like gravity. Before she drifted off, she heard voices in the hallway. Recognized one immediately. Her mother. Brigadier General Helen MacKenzie, retired, was not a woman who accepted being told to wait, even at 3 in the morning. Even by hospital staff who insisted visiting hours didn't start until 8. When Helen MacKenzie wanted to see her daughter, bureaucracy bent or broke. Sarah heard her mother's voice, firm but controlled, explaining to someone that she'd driven 2 hours from Colorado Springs in the middle of the night, and no, she would not wait in the lobby, and yes, she understood protocol, and would they please just let her see her daughter for 5 minutes. The door opened, Helen entered with the particular purposeful stride of someone who'd spent 40 years in uniform and still moved like parade ground was muscle memory. She was 62 years old but carried herself like 50. Silver hair cut military short, posture that could shame a drill sergeant, eyes that missed nothing. She stopped at the foot of Sarah's bed. Those eyes, sharp and assessing, cataloged every visible injury, every monitor reading, every detail that spoke to her daughter's condition. Then her face crumpled, just for a second, just long enough for Sarah to see the mother beneath the general. "Baby," Helen whispered. "Oh, baby." Sarah tried to sit up, failed. Her mother was at her side immediately, hands gentle despite their strength, easing her back against pillows. "Don't move. Just rest. I'm here." "Mama," Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. The bus. I couldn't. There were people." Helen's hand found Sarah's face, cupped her cheek with the tenderness that only mothers possess. "I know. Colonel Rutherford called me. Told me everything. Told me you saved 42 lives. Told me you climbed that ridge alone. Told me about Tommy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "He's alive, Mama. Tommy's alive. They said he was dead and I believed them, and he was alive the whole time." Helen's thumb wiped away tears that tracked down Sarah's face. "I know, sweetheart. I know." 4 years. 4 years he was up there alone. Helen sat on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to disturb the IV lines. Her hand never left Sarah's face. "Colonel Rutherford also told me what you did 4 years ago. The real story. Not the version Major Cross testified to. The actual events." Sarah went still. "How did he—" "Your friend Tommy had a voice recorder. From the helicopter wreckage. It captured radio traffic from the day of the avalanche, including Major Cross ordering your team onto unstable ground, including you objecting, including everything." Sarah's breathing quickened. The monitors beeped faster. "Easy," Helen soothed. "Easy, baby. Just breathe. It's okay. The truth is coming out. All of it." Sarah closed her eyes. 4 years. 4 years of believing she'd killed her own team. 4 years of carrying guilt that wasn't hers to carry. The door opened again. A doctor entered. Older man, maybe 60, with the weathered competence of someone who'd spent decades in military medicine. His name tag read Colonel Santos, MD. "Sergeant MacKenzie, glad to see you awake. I'm Dr. Santos. I've been overseeing your treatment. How are you feeling?" Sarah's voice was rough, tired, cold, confused. Santos checked her chart, examined her hands, her feet, tested reflexes and responses with a thoroughness that left no detail unconsidered. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Frostbite damage is minimal. You'll have some nerve sensitivity for a few weeks, but no permanent tissue loss. Your core temperature has stabilized. Kidney function is our only concern right now." "What's wrong with my kidney?" Santos exchanged a look with Helen. Something passed between them, some knowledge that Sarah wasn't privy to. "We're running additional tests. Could be nothing. Could be stress response from extreme cold. We'll know more in 24 hours. Sarah studied his face. "You're lying." Santos had the grace to look chagrined. "I'm being cautious. There's a difference." Helen squeezed Sarah's hand. "Let them run their tests, baby. Focus on resting." "I want to see Tommy." Santos shook his head. "Not yet. He's sedated. We had to perform emergency surgery to address infections that have been festering for years. He's stable, but he needs time to heal before visitors." Sarah's jaw set in a line her mother recognized, the stubborn line that meant argument was coming. Helen intervened. "Sarah Jane MacKenzie, you will listen to your doctors. Tommy isn't going anywhere. He waited 4 years. He can wait another day. And so can you." The use of her full name, spoken in that tone, was enough. Sarah subsided. Santos made more notes, gave instructions to the nurse, and left with a reminder that rest was not optional. It was prescription. When they were alone again, Helen pulled a chair close to the bed, sat with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do than be present. "Your father would be proud of you," she said quietly. Sarah's throat tightened. "I never gave him his medal back. It's still in my jacket pocket. The package got wet, probably ruined." Helen reached into her own pocket and pulled out a familiar shape. The small brown paper package, worse for wear, paper torn and twine missing, but intact. "Colonel Rutherford sent it with my personal effects." I opened it. "Hope you don't mind." Sarah shook her head. Helen unwrapped the damaged paper to reveal the bronze star case. Opened it. The metal gleamed under hospital lights, untouched by water, protected by its case. Your father earned this pulling 3 men out of a collapsed bridge in 2003, risked his life because that's what soldiers do. And 20 years later, his daughter climbed a mountain in a blizzard to save 42 people she'd never met. The apple didn't fall far, baby. Tears came again. Sarah didn't fight them. He died coming to see me, didn't he? 2 years ago, the accident. He was driving to Fort Carson. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. He was. He'd heard about your separation, about the demotion, about how you'd stopped answering my letters. He couldn't stand it anymore. Said he was going to drive up there and make you remember who you were. Sarah's chest felt like it was caving in. If I'd just answered your letters, if I'd just come home, he wouldn't have been on that road. Helen's grip tightened on her hand, painful enough to cut through the spiral. No, you don't get to do that. Your father made his choice. Black ice made that choice fatal. But you didn't kill him, Sarah, any more than you killed your team. You need to stop carrying deaths that aren't yours to carry. But Mama, no buts. Your father died trying to save you from drowning in guilt. Don't dishonor his memory by drowning anyway. The words hit like physical force. Sarah looked at her mother's face, saw grief there, saw love there, saw strength that had survived losing a husband and nearly losing a daughter and somehow remained unbroken. How do you do it? Sarah whispered. How do you keep going? Helen smiled, sad and small but real. I remember that every day I wake up is a day I get to choose. Grief or gratitude, guilt or grace. I can't bring your father back, can't change the past, but I can choose to honor him by living fully, by loving you completely, by refusing to let tragedy define me. Sarah absorbed that, let it settle into places that had been hollow for 4 years. Outside the room, voices rose in the hallway. Footsteps rapid. Someone speaking urgently. The door burst open. A man stood there, mid-50s, weathered face, eyes wild with emotion that looked like it might tear him apart. Behind him, a woman of similar age, crying openly, hands pressed to her mouth. The nurse tried to intervene. Sir, ma'am, you can't just... The man ignored her. His eyes locked on Sarah's. Your ghost. You're the one who found him. Sarah understood immediately. Tommy's parents, the people who'd buried an empty casket 4 years ago, who'd mourned a son they believed was gone. Helen stood, placed herself between them and Sarah with the instinct of a mother protecting her young. I'm Helen MacKenzie, Sarah's mother. You must be the Vegas. The man, Daniel Vega, nodded. His wife Maria couldn't speak, just kept crying. The nurse appeared with security, but Helen waved them off. It's fine, let them stay. Daniel stepped closer, hands shaking, voice breaking. They called us 3 hours ago, said our son, our Tommy, was alive, that he'd been on that mountain for 4 years and nobody knew. Is it true? Please, is it true? Sarah met his eyes. It's true, I saw him. Held him. He's alive, Mr. Vega. He's 2 doors down. Maria collapsed into a chair. Daniel braced himself against the wall. 4 years, he whispered. 4 years we mourned him. Had the funeral. Buried an empty casket. Cleared out his apartment. Gave his things away. And he was alive. Sarah's voice was gentle. He tried to signal for help. His radio was dead. He was injured. By the time he could move, he thought it was too late. Thought you'd moved on. Easier to stay dead than come back to a world that had buried him. Daniel's face twisted. We never moved on. Not one day. Maria still sets a place for him at dinner. Still keeps his room exactly like he left it. 4 years and we never stopped hoping. Helen guided them to chairs, sat them down, let them cry. Sarah watched them break and rebuild in the span of minutes. Watched grief transform into something that looked like joy, but carried too much pain to be simple. Can we see him? Maria finally asked. Can we see our boy? The nurse, who'd been standing in the doorway witnessing all of this, spoke softly. He's in recovery, sedated. But I can take you to his room. You can sit with him, talk to him. He might be able to hear you, even if he can't respond. Maria stood immediately. Daniel followed. They moved like people in a dream, uncertain if waking would shatter everything. At the door, Daniel turned back to Sarah. Thank you for finding him, for bringing him home. Sarah's throat closed. She could only nod. When they were gone, Helen sat back down heavily. That poor family. 4 years of hell. Sarah stared at the ceiling. Everyone lost something on that ridge. Tommy lost 4 years. His parents lost a son and got him back damaged. Linda and Doc lost everything. Their families lost them forever. And you, Helen asked, what did you lose? Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I lost the person I was before. The one who thought she was good enough, strong enough. The one who believed she could save everyone. Helen's hand found hers again. And what did you find? Sarah thought about 12 shots in the dark. 42 people brought home safe. Tommy alive against impossible odds. I don't know yet, she admitted, still figuring that out. Helen smiled. That's honest. I can work with honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Mother and daughter, survivor and witness, two women who'd lost too much but kept breathing anyway. Eventually, Sarah's eyes grew heavy. The painkillers in her IV were doing their work. Sleep pulled at her. Mama, she murmured. Stay. Helen adjusted her chair, settled in, took her daughter's hand in both of hers. I'm not going anywhere, baby. Not tonight, not ever again. Sarah drifted into sleep with her mother's voice humming something soft and familiar. A lullaby from childhood. Back when the world was simple and safety was guaranteed and mountains were just pictures in books instead of places where people went to die. She dreamed of snow and silence, and a voice calling her name through wind that carried sound away before it arrived. Ghost. Where are you, Ghost? I'm here, Tommy. I'm right here. The dream shifted. She was back on the ridge, lying prone in snow, rifle steady, crosshairs finding targets through darkness. But this time when she fired, the bullets became light, bright enough to guide, strong enough to save. She woke hours later to daylight streaming through windows and the sound of voices arguing in the hallway. Professional voices, official tones, the kind of conversation that meant bureaucracy had arrived to complicate recovery. Helen was gone, but a note on the bedside table explained she'd stepped out for coffee and would return shortly. Sarah's door opened. Colonel Rutherford entered, followed by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. 40-something, severe expression, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive and official. The woman spoke first. Sergeant MacKenzie, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Marks, Judge Advocate General's Office. I need to ask you some questions about the events of 4 years ago and the events of last night. Sarah's stomach dropped. Here it comes. The reckoning. Rutherford looked uncomfortable. Sarah, I want you to know that I advocated against this meeting happening while you're still in recovery. But Colonel Marks insisted. Marks set her briefcase on the table, pulled out a tablet and a voice recorder. Military investigations don't wait for convenient timing, Sergeant, especially not when new evidence contradicts official findings. Sarah sat up straighter despite the pain. What new evidence? Marks activated the tablet, showed Sarah a waveform, audio file, ready to play. Sergeant First Class Vega had this on his person when he was brought in. A voice recorder from the crashed helicopter. It contains radio communications from December 18th, 4 years ago, the day of Operation Frozen Dagger. Sarah's hands started shaking. Marks pressed play. Static, then voices, crystal clear, despite being recorded through cheap equipment 4 years ago. Major Richard Cross's voice, authoritative and certain. Falcon Overwatch, this is operations. Move your position to grid, November 7 Echo, Eastern Slope. Better sightlines for convoy observation. Sarah's own voice, younger, less certain. Sir, Eastern Slope shows unstable snow accumulation. Request permission to maintain current position or move to alternate grid, November 8. Cross's voice again, irritated now. Negative, Sergeant. Eastern Slope provides superior coverage. That's not a request. That's an order. Move your team to November 7 Echo. A pause, then Sarah's voice, resignation clear. Roger, operations. Moving to November 7 Echo. Tommy's voice in the background, quiet but audible. Ghost, that slope looks sketchy. Sarah's voice, I know, but orders are orders. The recording continued. 4 minutes of routine radio traffic, then a sound like the world ending. Explosion, rumble, screaming, Sarah's voice yelling for her team. Tommy shouting coordinates. Doc calling for help. Then silence. Mark stopped the playback. Looked at Sarah with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't hostility either. This recording contradicts Major Cross's testimony at your separation hearing. He stated under oath that you insisted on the Eastern Slope position despite his recommendations to the contrary. Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't process. 4 years of guilt built on a foundation of lies, and here was proof. Undeniable, recorded, real. Rutherford spoke up. Major Cross is currently being detained pending court-martial. Charges include false testimony, dereliction of duty, and negligent homicide. Sarah's voice came out flat. Negligent homicide for Linda and Doc. Yes, not for Tommy, because Tommy lived. Rutherford's expression was grim. Tommy survived despite Cross's actions, but Linda Hayes and Robert Chen died because of them. That's what we can prove. Marks continued, your separation, your demotion, the finding of command negligence. All of it was based on false testimony. The Army is prepared to offer full reinstatement, back pay, and a formal apology. Sarah laughed. The sound was bitter. 4 years too late. Marks closed her tablet. I understand your anger, Sergeant, but the Army is trying to make this right. You can't make it right. You can't give me back 4 years. Can't bring Linda and Doc back. Can't undo what this did to Tommy. No, Marks agreed. We can't. But we can acknowledge the truth. We can hold the guilty accountable. We can restore your honor. Sarah looked at Rutherford. Did you know? 4 years ago, did you know Cross was lying? Rutherford met her eyes, didn't look away. I suspected, but I didn't have proof. And suspicion doesn't override testimony from a superior officer. I failed you, Sergeant. I should have fought harder. Sarah appreciated the honesty, even if it didn't heal anything. Mark stood. I'll leave you to rest, but we'll need a formal statement in the next 48 hours, and there will be a hearing. Cross is demanding his right to face his accuser. Let him demand, Sarah said. I'll be there. When they left, Sarah sat in bed staring at nothing. 4 years. 4 years of self-hatred built on someone else's cowardice. 4 years of believing she'd failed when she'd done everything right. The door opened again. Helen returned with coffee and the morning paper. Took one look at Sarah's face and knew. What happened? Sarah told her. About the recording. About Cross's lies. About reinstatement and apologies and justice that came 4 years late. Helen set down the coffee, sat on the bed, pulled Sarah into a hug that felt like coming home. You were right all along, baby. You were right and they were wrong. Sarah buried her face in her mother's shoulder and cried. Not sad tears, not happy tears. Something more complicated. Relief and rage and grief all mixed together until they became indistinguishable. When the tears stopped, Helen held Sarah at arm's length, looked her in the eyes with the intensity that mothers use when truth matters more than comfort. What do you want to do? Reinstatement? Going back? Sarah thought about it. Really thought. About what going back would mean. Putting on the uniform that had become a prison. Working for an army that had betrayed her. Pretending 4 years hadn't happened. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to tell them where they can shove their apology. And the other part? The other part remembers what it felt like to guide that convoy home. To save 42 lives. To be ghost again, even just for one night. Helen nodded. Then take your time deciding. The Army can wait. You've waited 4 years. They can wait a few weeks. There was a knock at the door. A nurse appeared, young, different from the night shift. Sergeant MacKenzie? Sergeant Vega is awake. He's asking for you. Sarah looked at her mother. Helen smiled. Go, I'll be here when you get back. Sarah stood on shaky legs. The nurse brought a wheelchair despite Sarah's protest that she could walk. You just spent 90 minutes in hypothermic conditions, the nurse said firmly. You're not walking anywhere. Sit. Sarah sat. The nurse wheeled her down the hallway. 2 doors down, same ICU, different room. Outside Tommy's door, his parents sat holding hands, faces showing the particular exhaustion that comes from emotional overload. Maria Vega looked up, smiled through tears. He's been asking for you. Won't settle until he knows you're okay. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm okay, is he? Go see for yourself, Daniel said. The nurse pushed open the door, wheeled Sarah inside. Tommy lay in a bed identical to hers, IV lines, monitors, bandages, but his good eye was open. Alert. Tracked her movement as the nurse positioned Sarah's wheelchair beside his bed. Hey, Ghost, he said, voice rough but unmistakably him. Hey, Tommy. They looked at each other. 4 years of separation, 4 years of grief and survival and impossible endurance, all of it present in the space between their beds. You look terrible, Tommy said. Sarah laughed. You look worse. Fair point. He tried to sit up, winced, settled back. Doctors say I'm a medical miracle. 4 years on rabbits and old MREs shouldn't leave someone alive, let alone able to talk. You always were stubborn. Learn from the best. Silence settled, comfortable despite the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, Tommy spoke. I heard them talking. About the recording, about Cross lying, about you being right. Sarah nodded. I'm sorry, Ghost. Sorry I couldn't tell anyone. Sorry the radio was dead. Sorry I let you carry that guilt for 4 years. Sarah reached across the space between beds, found his hand, held it. You survived, Tommy. That's what matters. You survived and you waited and you never gave up hope. That's more than anyone could ask. Tommy's good eye filled with tears. I tried to save them. Linda and Doc. I tried everything. I know you did. Linda asked about you at the end, asked if you made it out. I told her yes. Told her you'd come back for us eventually. Sarah's vision blurred. You told her the truth. Tommy squeezed her hand. You did come back. Took 4 years, but you came back. The door opened. A doctor entered, older, kind-faced, carrying charts that probably contained information neither of them wanted to hear. Sergeant Vega, Sergeant MacKenzie, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Chen. I've been overseeing both your cases. Sarah's attention sharpened. Chen, same last name as Doc. The doctor saw her expression. Robert Chen was my brother. He died 4 years ago on Widow's Ridge. The room went silent. Dr. Chen continued, voice steady despite the emotion underneath. When they told me Sergeant Vega was alive, that he'd been with my brother at the end, I requested this assignment. I needed to know what happened. Needed to hear it from someone who was there. Tommy's face went pale. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I tried to save him. I did everything I knew, but the infection. Dr. Chen held up a hand. I've read your medical reports, Sergeant. I know what you did. How you tried to treat his wounds with no equipment. How you stayed with him until the end. How you buried him with your bare hands in frozen ground. She pulled a chair close to Tommy's bed, sat down like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. My brother's last letter home was 3 days before the avalanche. He wrote about his spotter, said you were the best soldier he'd ever worked with. Said if anything happened to him, he knew you'd take care of Emma, his daughter. Tommy's tears fell freely now. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry Emma lost her dad. Dr. Chen reached out, took Tommy's hand in hers. You gave him 4 extra days. 4 days where he wasn't alone. Where someone held him and comforted him and let him talk about his daughter. That's not failure, Sergeant. That's grace. She stood, wiped her eyes, composed herself with visible effort. I'm going to make sure both of you receive the best care this hospital can provide. Not because it's my job, because my brother would have done the same for you, and because you both deserve to heal. She left before either of them could respond. Sarah and Tommy sat in silence, processing, absorbing, trying to understand how to carry forward when the past kept reaching back. Finally, Tommy spoke. What happens now, Ghost? Where do we go from here? Sarah looked at their joined hands, at the monitors beeping steady rhythms, at the window showing sunrise over mountains that had taken everything and somehow given something back. We heal, she said. We testify at Cross's trial. We figure out who we are now that the truth is out. And after that, Sarah smiled, small but real. After that, we teach other people how to survive impossible things, because apparently we're experts. Tommy laughed, winced from the pain it caused, but kept laughing anyway. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I guess we are. The afternoon brought visitors. Sarah was dozing, still holding Tommy's hand across the gap between their beds, when voices in the hallway announced the arrival of people who'd been given clearance despite hospital protocols. Captain Derek Morrison entered first, still in field uniform, dirt from Widow's Ridge still visible on his boots. Behind him came 6 more soldiers from Convoy Delta 12. They filled the small room until it felt crowded and warm and alive. Morrison stood at the foot of Sarah's bed, cleared his throat, looked uncomfortable in the way officers do when emotion threatens composure. Sergeant MacKenzie, Sergeant Vega, he paused. We wanted to come say thank you, in person. All 42 of us wanted to come, but the hospital said that might be excessive. Sarah tried to sit up. Tommy was already struggling to raise his bed, wincing with each movement. A specialist Sarah recognized from the thermal signature stepped forward. Her name tag read Chen. Different Chen. This one was maybe 23, alive because Sarah had fired 12 shots in darkness. Ma'am, I'm Specialist Jennifer Chen. No relation to Doc Chen, but I knew him. He trained me in combat medicine before he deployed. When I heard what happened, that you both were with him at the end, I needed to thank you for staying with him, for not leaving him alone. Tommy's voice was rough. He talked about you, about how proud he was that you'd chosen military medicine, about how you were going to save lives. Jennifer's eyes filled. He said that? Every day, Tommy confirmed. Said you had the touch, the instinct, said you'd be better than he ever was. Jennifer broke down. Morrison's hand steadied her shoulder. Another soldier stepped forward. Private First Class Daniel Rutherford, Colonel's nephew, 20 years old with a face that still carried the softness of someone who hadn't been fully tested until last night. Sergeant MacKenzie, I was ready to die up there. I'd made peace with it, thought there was no way out. Then I saw those sparks, saw them appearing exactly where we needed them. And I realized someone was fighting for us, someone who didn't even know our names. Sarah's voice was quiet. I know your name now, Private. Daniel smiled, shaky but real. Because of you, my uncle gets to keep his nephew. My parents get to keep their son. My girlfriend gets to keep planning a wedding. A staff sergeant, older, maybe 35, spoke up. Carlos Ruiz. I got a daughter who turned 6 yesterday. I missed her birthday because of the convoy delay. But because of you, I'll make it to her 7th, and her 17th, and her wedding. One by one, they introduced themselves. 42 people compressed into 7 representatives, each one carrying a gratitude that felt too big for words but needed speaking anyway. Morrison pulled something from his pocket, a piece of paper, folded and worn like it had been handled many times. This is the roster from Convoy Delta 12. All 42 names. Everyone signed it. We wanted you to have it. Wanted you to know exactly who you saved. He handed it to Sarah. She unfolded it with shaking hands. The names filled the page in different handwriting. Some neat, some barely legible. Each one followed by a signature and a short message. Thank you for my life, PFC James Sullivan. You gave my kids their mom back. SSG Maria Torres. I owe you everything. SPC Robert Kim. On and on. 42 expressions of gratitude for 12 shots fired by someone they'd never met. Sarah couldn't read past the 10th name. Her vision blurred too much. Tommy reached over, took the roster, read the names aloud, each one a heartbeat, each one a future that almost didn't happen. When he finished, the room was silent except for the sound of people crying who'd come to say thank you, but ended up sharing grief. Morrison spoke again. The Army is putting together a commendation, probably a silver star for both of you. There's talk of a ceremony. Sarah shook her head. No ceremony, no medals. We just did what needed doing. With respect, ma'am, Morrison said, that's exactly why you deserve recognition. Because to you, it was just doing what needed doing. To us, it was everything. The specialists began filing out, each one stopping to shake hands or salute or simply make eye contact in a way that said more than words could. When they were gone, the room felt empty despite Sarah, Tommy, and the nurse who'd stayed quietly in the corner. The nurse checked their vitals, made notes, then paused. You two should know, she said gently. The hospital chapel has had a steady stream of visitors all day. People lighting candles, people praying, people leaving notes of thanks. The chaplain said he's never seen anything like it. For us? Sarah asked, disbelieving. For you, the nurse confirmed. News traveled fast. Fort Carson knows what happened, knows who you are, what you did. The base is calling it the miracle of Widow's Ridge. Tommy laughed weakly. Some miracle. People died 4 years ago. We just got lucky last night. The nurse's expression softened. Luck is being in the right place at the right time. Courage is choosing to be in the hard place at the worst time. You both chose courage. That's not luck. That's character. She left them alone again. Tommy looked at Sarah. Character, huh? Fancy word for being too stubborn to quit. Sarah smiled. You waited 4 years in a frozen cave eating rabbits. I climbed a mountain in a blizzard with a bum knee. We're definitely stubborn. Tommy's expression grew serious. Ghost, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really come back? You were at the bus, had your leave papers, could have gone home. What made you turn around? Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching snow fall outside the window, thinking about brown paper packages and mothers who waited and promises written on torn gloves. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, she finally said. 4 years ago, I lost my team and it broke me. If I lost 42 more people because I chose comfort over duty, it would have destroyed me completely. I came back because sometimes the hardest choice is the only one you can live with. Tommy nodded slowly. I get that. I waited 4 years for the same reason. Leaving that ridge, even if I could have, would have meant leaving Linda and Doc behind. Meant their graves would be unmarked and forgotten. Couldn't do it. So I stayed, waited, hoped. They sat in shared understanding. 2 people who'd survived by refusing to abandon what mattered, even when abandoning it would have been easier. The door burst open. A young man in civilian clothes, maybe 24, face flushed like he'd run the whole way. Security was chasing him, but he was faster. Sarah recognized him immediately. Corporal Marcus Webb, the one who'd mocked her at the terminal, who'd called her admin queen, who'd laughed about her never seeing combat. He stopped at the foot of her bed, breathing hard. Security caught up, but the nurse waved them off. Marcus looked at Sarah, at Tommy, at the monitors and bandages and visible evidence of what they'd endured. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Sarah studied him, young, scared, ashamed. "For what, Corporal?" "For everything I said at the terminal. For mocking you. For thinking I knew anything about you when I knew nothing. For being a coward who judged a hero." Sarah's expression didn't change. "You weren't a coward, Corporal. You were ignorant. There's a difference." Marcus flinched like she'd struck him. "I know, and I can't take it back. Can't undo the things I said, but I can stand here and tell you that I was wrong, that you're 10 times the soldier I'll ever be, that I'm ashamed of myself." Tommy spoke up. "What's your MOS, Corporal?" Marcus blinked, surprised. "Infantry Sergeant. 11 Bravo. Combat experience?" "None. I've been stateside my whole career. Training rotations only." Tommy exchanged a look with Sarah. She nodded slightly. "Corporal Cub," Tommy said, "you want to make this right? Stop apologizing and start learning. Request transfer to sniper school. Work your ass off. Become the kind of soldier who doesn't need to tear others down to feel adequate." Marcus's eyes widened. "You think I could make sniper school?" Tommy shrugged his good shoulder. "I don't know, but Ghost and I are probably going to be teaching there if the Army gets its way. You show up humble and willing to work, we'll show you what real soldiers look like." Marcus stood straighter. "Yes, Sergeant, I'll request the transfer tomorrow." "Good," Sarah said. "Now get out of here before security decides you're actually a threat." Marcus saluted, imperfect but sincere. "Thank you, both of you, for the second chance." He left at a run, dodging security, disappearing down the hallway. Tommy chuckled. "You really want to teach that kid?" Sarah smiled. "Everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were. We got ours. Seems fair to pass it forward." The evening brought one more visitor. Sergeant Major Hutchins appeared as the sun was setting, carrying 2 boxes that clinked with the sound of glass touching glass. The nurse tried to intercept him. "Sir, no outside food or drink is—" Hutchins gave her a look that suggested she could either let him pass or discover what happens when you tell a Vietnam vet with a silver star that hospital policy outranks common sense. She let him pass. Hutchins set the boxes on the table between beds, opened them to reveal glass bottles of root beer, old-fashioned kind with real sugar, and 2 containers of chocolate pudding. "Hospital food is terrible," he announced. "Figured you could use something that doesn't taste like cardboard." Sarah laughed. "Sergeant Major, you're going to get us in trouble." "Already in trouble," he said cheerfully. "Figured I'd make it worthwhile." He pulled up a chair, settled in like he planned to stay a while, opened a root beer for each of them, helped them get the straws positioned properly. They drank in comfortable silence for a while. The sugar hit Sarah's system like a benediction. Finally, Hutchins spoke. "I've been thinking about what happened on that ridge. Both ridges, 4 years ago and last night." "What about it?" Tommy asked. "About how the Army failed both of you. Failed to protect you 4 years ago. Failed to find you when you needed finding. Failed to defend you when you needed defending." Sarah started to object, but Hutchins held up a hand. "Let me finish. The Army failed you, but you didn't fail the Army. You didn't fail each other. You didn't fail the 42 people who are breathing right now because you refused to quit. That matters. That matters more than all the investigations and court-martials and official apologies combined." He pulled something from his pocket. A patch. Falcon Overwatch. The one Sarah had folded away 4 years ago. "Colonel Rutherford asked me to return this to you. Said it never should have been taken in the first place." Sarah looked at the patch. Faded fabric. Worn edges. The symbol of who she used to be. "I don't know if I want it back," she admitted. "Don't know if I'm that person anymore." Hutchins set it on her bedside table. "Then figure out who you are now. But don't throw away who you were. That woman saved lives, deserves to be remembered even if she doesn't come back." Tommy reached for the patch, held it up to the light. The embroidered falcon looked fierce, even faded. "We all change, Ghost," he said. 4 years ago, I was a cocky spotter who thought I was invincible. Now I'm half blind, half deaf, and wise enough to know survival is mostly luck and stubbornness. But I'm still me. Damaged version, maybe, but still me. Sarah took the patch back, turned it over in her hands, felt the weight of memory and possibility. What if I can't be Ghost anymore? What if that part of me died on the ridge? Hutchins stood, prepared to leave. At the door, he paused. Ghost isn't about being perfect, Sergeant. It's about showing up when everyone else has quit. You did that last night, did it 4 years ago, did it every day in between when you chose to keep breathing despite the guilt trying to bury you. That's Ghost. That's who you are. The rest is just details. He left them with root beer and pudding and thoughts too big for hospital rooms. Night fell. Nurses changed shifts. Visiting hours ended. The hospital settled into the quiet rhythm of after dark when healing happens in silence. Sarah and Tommy lay in their respective beds, hands still joined across the gap, watching snow fall outside windows that framed mountains in darkness. Tommy, Sarah said quietly, tell me about it. The 4 years. I need to know. Tommy was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, voice low and steady, telling the story he'd carried alone for so long. He told her about the first week, about digging himself out of snow that had buried him alive, about finding Linda and Doc alive but broken, about Michael's body under the boulder he couldn't move. He told her about Linda's miscarriage, about holding her while she bled out, about her last words asking if Ghost had made it, about burying her with bare hands in ground so frozen he broke 3 fingers. He told her about Doc's infection, about watching sepsis take him slowly, about his delirium, about his final moments calling for his daughter Emma, about burying him next to Linda. He told her about the helicopter wreckage, about finding supplies that shouldn't have been there, about 60 MREs and a thermal battery and equipment that meant the difference between dying in week 2 and surviving to year 4. He told her about the loneliness, about talking to graves because silence was worse, about marking days on cave walls until he lost count, about the moment he stopped hoping for rescue and started hoping for death. He told her about the radio, about hearing her separation hearing, about cross-lying, about wanting to scream the truth but having no way to reach anyone. He told her about deciding to stay, about choosing to guard the graves rather than abandon them, about waiting because someone needed to remember, someone needed to bear witness. He told her about seeing her thermal signature last night, about recognizing her shooting pattern, about knowing she'd come back even though 4 years said she wouldn't. When he finished, Sarah was crying silently, tears tracking down her face in the darkness. I'm so sorry, Tommy. Sorry you went through that alone. Sorry I didn't come sooner. Tommy squeezed her hand. You came exactly when you were supposed to. Not a day earlier. Not a day later. Everything had to break the right way for last night to happen. For you to be at that terminal. For that convoy to be in trouble. For me to still be alive and watching. All of it had to line up perfectly. You really believe that? That it was meant to happen this way? Tommy looked at her. Good eye serious. I survived 4 years on a frozen mountain eating rabbits and drinking snowmelt. You climbed that same mountain in a blizzard and saved 42 lives while finding the one person everyone said was dead. If that's not meant to be, I don't know what is. Sarah absorbed that, let it settle into places that had been empty. What happens to us now, she asked. Where do we go from here? Tommy smiled. Wherever we want, Ghost. We've got second chances, rare as they come. Figure we should use them. Doing what? He thought about it. Teaching sounds good, passing on what we learned, making sure the next generation doesn't have to learn it the hard way. And if the army won't let us, then we figure something else out. Together. Sarah squeezed his hand. Together. Yeah, I like the sound of that. They fell asleep like that. Hands joined, mountains visible through windows. Snow falling soft enough to muffle the sound of 2 soldiers choosing to believe that surviving was just the beginning, not the end. That healing was possible even when damage seemed permanent. That Ghost and her spotter, separated by death and reunited by miracle, might actually have a future worth fighting for. Outside, Fort Carson settled into winter night. Inside, 2 impossible survivors dreamed of mountains that didn't kill them, and shots that saved instead of destroyed, and a world that might possibly have room for people who refuse to stay buried. Tomorrow would bring questions, investigations, decisions about rank and duty, and what justice looked like when it came 4 years late. But tonight, there was just 2 soldiers who'd climbed out of their own graves and decided that maybe, just maybe, they deserved to stay alive. Even if staying alive was harder than dying had ever been, they'd survived worse. And they'd survived this too. 7 days passed in the careful rhythm of hospital recovery. Sarah's core temperature stabilized. The frostbite damage to her fingers healed without tissue loss, leaving only sensitivity to cold that doctors said might last months or might last forever. Her knee, aggravated by the climb, required daily physical therapy sessions that left her sweating and cursing, but slowly improving. Tommy's recovery was more complicated. 4 years of malnutrition had done damage that couldn't be fixed with IV nutrients and hot meals. His body was learning to process food again, relearning how to maintain weight, rediscovering what normal felt like after forgetting for so long. They kept their beds side by side despite hospital protocols suggesting separation. The nurses had given up arguing. These two had survived worse than hospital policy. They'd earned the right to heal together. On the 8th morning, Dr. Santos entered with an expression that made Sarah's stomach drop. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of officers delivering bad news, on the faces of chaplains preparing families for loss, on the faces of doctors who had to explain that medicine had limits. He pulled a chair between their beds, set his tablet down, folded his hands in a way that suggested he was choosing words carefully. Sergeant Vega, we've completed the comprehensive workup on your kidney function. The results are concerning. Tommy had been eating breakfast, set down his fork, prepared himself the way soldiers do when incoming is inevitable. How concerning. Santos pulled up charts on his tablet, turned it so Tommy could see. Numbers and graphs that meant nothing to Sarah but everything to the doctor. 4 years of dehydration, malnutrition, and untreated infections have caused significant damage to both kidneys. Your filtration rate is at 30% of normal. You're in stage 3 kidney failure, progressing towards stage 4. Tommy's face didn't change. What does that mean in terms I can understand? It means without intervention, you have approximately 6 months before total kidney failure. At that point, you'll need dialysis to survive. Eventually, you'll need a transplant. 6 months, Tommy repeated, voice flat. Okay. Sarah's heart stopped. Actually stopped. Then restarted with a stutter that made the monitors beep. Wait, she said. Wait, there has to be treatment, medication, something. Santos looked at her with the sympathy doctors reserve for family members who don't want to accept reality. There are medications that can slow the progression, but the damage is extensive. 4 years of barely surviving took a toll we can't fully reverse. Tommy reached over, found Sarah's hand, squeezed it. It's okay, Ghost. I got 4 more years than anyone expected. 6 more months is a gift. That's not acceptable, Sarah said, voice rising. Not acceptable at all. Test me. Santos blinked. I'm sorry. Test me for compatibility. Kidney donation. I'm O positive. Same blood type. Test me. Sergeant MacKenzie, Santos began carefully. Kidney donation is major surgery. The recovery time alone is... I don't care about recovery time. Test me. Tommy squeezed her hand harder. Ghost, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. You've already saved my life twice. Once 4 years ago by trying to call the retreat. Once last week by climbing that ridge. You don't owe me a kidney. Sarah turned to face him fully, ignored the pain in her knee, ignored the monitors, ignored everything except Tommy's face. This isn't about owing. This is about the fact that I spent 4 years believing you were dead. 4 years carrying guilt for your death. And now you're sitting here alive, and I'm not going to let you die for real because I was too selfish to donate a kidney I don't even need both of. Tommy's good eye filled with tears. Ghost. Test her, Tommy said to Santos, because she's not going to let this go, and I've known her long enough to recognize when arguing is pointless. Santos looked between them, saw something that made him nod slowly. I'll order the compatibility screening, but you both need to understand the risks. Sergeant MacKenzie, your body has been through significant trauma recently. Adding major surgery to that could complicate your recovery. Understood, Sarah said. Test me anyway. When Santos left, Tommy and Sarah sat in silence, hands still joined. Finally, Tommy spoke. You're insane, you know that, right? Takes one to know one. You waited 4 years in a frozen cave, I can give you 1 kidney. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Sarah's voice was gentle. We both chose to survive when quitting would have been easier. We both refused to abandon what mattered. This is just the next version of that choice. Tommy's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. What if something goes wrong? What if the surgery damages you permanently? Then I'll have scars that match yours. We'll be a matching set. Tommy laughed. The sound was wet and broken but real. You're impossible. So are you. That's why we work. The door opened. Helen MacKenzie entered carrying coffee and the morning newspaper. took one look at their faces and knew immediately that something had shifted. What happened? Sarah told her. About Tommy's kidneys, about the 6-month timeline, about her decision to donate. Helen set down the coffee carefully, sat in the chair Santos had vacated, looked at her daughter with an expression that mixed pride and terror, and the particular pain mothers feel when their children choose danger. Are you sure about this, baby? I'm sure, Mama. Helen turned to Tommy. And you? How do you feel about this? Tommy met her eyes. Terrified, ma'am. Grateful. Completely undeserving. But if Ghost is determined to do this, I'm not going to insult her by refusing. Helen nodded slowly. Then I'll be there for the surgery, for the recovery, for all of it. She stood, pulled Sarah into a hug that felt like armor and shelter and home all at once. Your father would say you're being reckless, she whispered into Sarah's hair. And then he'd tell me how proud he is that you're brave enough to be reckless for the right reasons. Sarah held her mother and let herself be held and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. The compatibility test took 3 days. Sarah spent that time in physical therapy, rebuilding strength in her knee, preparing her body for surgery that would take more than it gave, at least initially. Tommy spent the same 3 days arguing with doctors about whether he should even accept the donation, arguing with himself about whether survival was worth the cost to someone else, arguing with God about why 4 years of hell wasn't enough suffering without adding this complication. Sarah ignored all his arguments, ignored the doctors who suggested waiting, ignored the voice in her head that whispered about surgical risks and recovery complications, and the possibility that giving away a kidney might be the choice that finally broke her. On the 3rd day, Santos returned with the results. You're a match, he told Sarah. 6 out of 6 HLA markers. That's as perfect as compatibility gets. The transplant team is willing to proceed if you both consent. When? Sarah asked. Santos consulted his tablet. Surgical slot opens in 4 days. December 30th. That gives us time to prep both of you, run final clearances, make sure you're stable enough for the procedure. 4 days, Tommy said. New Year's Eve. Quite the way to end the year. Better than how it started, Sarah pointed out. Started with you presumed dead, ending with you getting a kidney. I'd call that progress. The consent forms were extensive. Pages of risks and complications and percentages that added up to uncertainty wrapped in medical terminology. Sarah signed without reading most of it. Tommy signed with hands that shook. Helen witnessed both signatures, held Sarah's hand through the process. You don't have to do this, she said one more time. You're allowed to choose yourself. I am choosing myself, Mama. I'm choosing to live in a world where Tommy survives. That's as selfish as any other choice. Helen kissed her daughter's forehead. Then let's make sure you both survive. The day before surgery, another visitor arrived. This one less welcome, but necessary. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Marks from JAG, carrying briefcase and tablet, and the news that Major Richard Cross's court-martial was scheduled for January 15th. Both of you will need to testify, she informed them. In person if you're recovered enough. Via video conference if not. Tommy spoke up from his bed. What are the charges? Marks consulted her notes. Negligent homicide for Specialist Linda Hayes and Sergeant Robert Chen. False testimony at an official proceeding. Conduct unbecoming an officer. Dereliction of duty. What's he facing? Sarah asked. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of pension and benefits. 15 to 20 years in military prison. Good, Tommy said quietly. That's good. Marks looked at him. The prosecution is building the case primarily on the voice recorder evidence and your testimony about what happened during those 4 days after the avalanche. We need you to be prepared to describe in detail how Hayes and Chen died. Tommy's face closed down, became the mask Sarah recognized from when pain was too much to show. I can do that. It won't be easy, Marks warned. Cross's defense attorney will try to discredit you. We'll suggest 4 years of isolation affected your memory. We'll imply you're lying to protect Sergeant MacKenzie. Let them try, Tommy said. I remember every second, every word Linda spoke before she died, every time Doc called for his daughter, every hour I spent digging graves with frozen hands. They want details? I'll give them details until the jury can't sleep at night. Marks nodded. Good. Because this case is about more than punishing one officer. It's about making sure the Army acknowledges what happened, makes sure it doesn't happen again. After she left, Sarah and Tommy sat in heavy silence. Finally, Sarah spoke. You don't have to testify if it's too much. I can tell them what you told me. Tommy shook his head. No, I need to do this. need to speak for Linda and Doc. They don't get to defend themselves, don't get to tell their stories. So I'll tell it for them. Even if it breaks you, Tommy looked at her. Already broken, Ghost. Already put back together wrong. Testifying might hurt, but staying silent would destroy me. Sarah understood. Some wounds needed opening before they could heal properly. The night before surgery, sleep was impossible. Sarah lay in her bed watching Tommy sleep fitfully in his, watching monitors track his heartbeat, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and thinking about how close she'd come to never seeing that movement again. Her mother had gone back to Colorado Springs to pack supplies for the extended hospital stay post-surgery, promised to return before dawn. Before they wheeled Sarah into the operating room to remove a kidney she'd been born with and give it to a man who'd spent 4 years dying slowly on a frozen mountain. The insanity of it struck her suddenly. She was volunteering for major surgery to save someone the Army had declared dead, someone who wasn't family, wasn't romantic partner, was just a friend who'd become a ghost who'd become a miracle. But insane didn't mean wrong, and volunteering didn't mean regret. Tommy's eyes opened, found her in the darkness. He'd developed the ability to sense when she was awake. 4 years of hypervigilance didn't disappear in 4 weeks. Can't sleep? He asked. Nervous, she admitted. Me too. They lay in silence, listening to machines breathe for them, watching snow fall outside windows that frame mountains in darkness. Ghost, Tommy said quietly, if something goes wrong tomorrow, if the surgery doesn't work, or complications happen or anything, I need you to know something. Sarah's heart clenched. Nothing's going to go wrong. But if it does, if I don't make it, I need you to know that these 4 weeks, getting to see you again, getting to know the truth came out, getting to watch you save all those people, that's enough. That's more than I ever hoped for when I was up on that ridge alone. Sarah's voice was fierce. You're going to make it. We both are. And then we're going to testify against Cross and watch him spend the rest of his career in prison. And then we're going to teach arrogant corporals like Marcus Webb what real soldiers look like. And you're going to meet Emma Chen and tell her that her father was a hero. All of that is going to happen because we don't get to quit now. Tommy smiled. Okay, Ghost. Okay, we don't quit. Promise me. I promise. No quitting, not after surviving this long. The door opened. A nurse Sarah didn't recognize entered with pre-surgery medication, pills and instructions, and a reminder that nothing by mouth after midnight. This is it, the nurse said gently. Last chance to change your mind. Sarah looked at Tommy, at the man who'd waited 4 years, who'd buried their friends alone, who'd survived on hope and stubbornness, in the belief that someday, somehow, Ghost would return. Not changing my mind, she said. The nurse nodded. Then get some rest. Both of you, tomorrow's going to be a long day. When she left, Sarah reached across the gap between beds, found Tommy's hand in the darkness, held on like letting go meant falling. See you on the other side, she whispered. Tommy squeezed back. See you on the other side, Ghost. They fell asleep like that. Hands joined, hearts beating in rhythm picked up by monitors that hummed approval. 2 soldiers facing the next battle the only way they knew how. Together. The operating room was cold. Colder than Sarah expected. Colder than necessary. She lay on the table in a gown that provided no warmth, no dignity, no defense against what was coming. The surgical team moved around her with efficient choreography. Anesthesiologists checking lines. Nurses prepping equipment. Surgeon reviewing charts one last time. Dr. Santos appeared above her, masked and gloved and ready. Sergeant MacKenzie, last chance. Are you absolutely certain about this? Sarah's voice was steady. Absolutely certain. Santos nodded. Then let's begin. Count backward from 10 for me. 10, 9, 8. The world went soft around the edges. 7, 6. She thought about Tommy in the next operating room over. Thought about surgeons preparing to remove his damaged kidney. Thought about the healthy one she was about to give him. 5, 4. She thought about Linda Hayes and Doc Chen, about graves dug in frozen ground, about sacrifices made alone in darkness. 3, 2. She thought about her father, about bronze stars and promises, about driving through ice to save a daughter who was already saved. 1. Darkness took her gently, pulled her down into absence where pain couldn't reach and fear couldn't follow, and choices were already made, so there was nothing left but trust. Hours passed that felt like seconds, seconds that felt like years. Time became meaningless in the space between anesthesia and waking. When consciousness returned, it came with pain, deep pain, the kind that starts in bone and radiates outward until even breathing hurts. Sarah's side felt like it had been opened and excavated and put back together with staples and hope, which technically it had. A recovery room nurse appeared, different from the one who'd given pre-surgery meds, older, kinder looking. "Welcome back, Sergeant. Surgery went well. Dr. Santos will be in shortly to explain everything, but the short version is you did great. Kidney is out and on its way to Sergeant Vega's surgical suite." Sarah's mouth was dry, couldn't form words. The nurse held water with a straw. "Let her sip." "How long?" Sarah managed. "Surgery took 4 hours. You've been in recovery for 30 minutes. Still groggy from anesthesia, but that's normal." "Tommy?" The nurse smiled. "No word yet. His surgery is more complex, but the transplant team knows what they're doing. Try to rest. We'll update you as soon as we know anything." Rest was impossible. Sarah lay in recovery, feeling like she'd been split open, which she had, and waiting for news about whether her sacrifice had meaning or was just another way to lose someone she couldn't afford to lose. Helen appeared an hour later, face drawn, eyes red. She'd been in the waiting room watching clocks tick and trying to pray despite not believing in prayer. "Baby, how the hell you feeling?" Sarah's laugh came out wrong, like I gave away a kidney. Helen took her hand, held it between both of hers, brought it to her lips, and kissed knuckles that were bruised from IV placements. "They just took Tommy into transplant," she said. "Your kidney looked perfect." Santos said it was one of the healthiest he'd ever seen, said Tommy is lucky to get it. Sarah's chest tightened, not pain from surgery, something else. Something that felt like hope trying to take root in ground that had been barren too long. "How much longer?" Helen checked her watch. "Transplant surgery usually takes 4 to 6 hours. He went in 40 minutes ago, so we wait." They waited. Helen pulled a chair close to the recovery bed, held Sarah's hand, talked about nothing important, about Colorado Springs weather, about the neighbor's new about anything that wasn't surgery or kidneys or the possibility of loss. Santos appeared 3 hours later, still in surgical scrubs, mask pulled down, face showing the particular exhaustion that comes from hours of intense focus. "Both surgeries were successful," he said without preamble. "Sergeant MacKenzie, your kidney was removed without complications. You'll need to stay in recovery for another hour, then we'll move you to a room. Pain management will be significant for the first few days, but you should recover fully." "And Tommy?" Sarah asked, voice tight. Santos smiled, tired but genuine. "Sergeant Vega's transplant went smoothly. Your kidney began functioning immediately. His color improved within minutes of vascular connection. Preliminary numbers show excellent kidney function. He's going to be okay? Barring complications, yes, he's going to be okay. You gave him years, Sergeant, maybe decades. That's no small gift." Sarah's eyes closed. Tears leaked from corners without permission. Relief so intense it felt like pain. Helen was crying too, quietly, holding Sarah's hand like letting go meant falling. "When can I see him?" Sarah asked. Santos considered. "You're both going to need intensive monitoring for the next 48 hours. But I can arrange to have your recovery rooms next to each other. You've been healing side by side this long. No reason to stop now." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for everything." Santos patted her shoulder. "You did the hard part, Sergeant. I just facilitated. Get some rest. You've earned it." Recovery was brutal. The kind of pain that made breathing feel like a luxury and movement feel like punishment. Sarah's entire left side throbbed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Every cough, every shift in position, every attempt to sit up brought waves of agony that medication dulled but couldn't eliminate. Tommy's recovery was worse. Transplant recipients endure more trauma than donors. His body was learning to accept foreign tissue, fighting the immune response that wanted to reject the new kidney, processing medications that suppressed natural defenses. But his color improved daily. The grayish pallor that had marked him since the rescue faded into something closer to healthy. His energy increased. His appetite returned. The new kidney was working, filtering toxins, restoring function that had been failing for months. They spent New Year's Eve in adjacent hospital rooms, connected by an open door and shared experience. Too tired to celebrate, too grateful to complain. Just breathing and healing and choosing to believe that survival was worth the cost. Helen stayed with them through the transition from December to January, sat between their rooms, read aloud from books neither of them could focus on but both appreciated hearing. Provided the kind of steady presence that makes recovery feel less like endurance and more like progress. On January 2nd, Dr. Santos cleared them both for limited mobility. Sarah could walk short distances with assistance. Tommy could sit up without vertigo, small victories that felt monumental. On January 5th, the bandages came off. Surgical sites healing clean, no infection, no complications. Just scars that would fade to white lines eventually, but would always mark the place where one soldier gave part of herself to save another. On January 8th, Marcus Webb visited, brought flowers he'd clearly picked himself from the base grounds, frost still clinging to stems. Stood at the door looking uncertain. "Come in, Corporal," Sarah said. "You're not in trouble." Marcus entered hesitantly, set the flowers on the table between beds, cleared his throat. "I wanted to update you both. I submitted my request for sniper school, got accepted into the next class starting in March." Tommy smiled. "That's good work, Corporal. You'll do fine if you remember the first rule." "What's the first rule, Sergeant?" "Listen to your spotter. They're trying to keep you alive." Marcus nodded seriously. "I'll remember that." He started to leave, then turned back. "I also wanted to say I've been talking to the other soldiers from the terminal, the ones who mock Sergeant MacKenzie. We're starting a petition, asking the Army to formally recognize what you did. Both of you, not just commendations. Real recognition." Sarah started to object, but Marcus held up a hand. "With respect, ma'am, you don't get to refuse this one. What you did matters. What you both survived matters. And the soldiers who are alive because of you want that on record. Want their kids to know that when everything went wrong, two broken soldiers chose to be unbroken long enough to save everyone else." He left before either of them could respond. Tommy looked at Sarah. "Broken soldiers choosing to be unbroken. That's one way to put it." "Better than most ways," Sarah admitted. On January 10th, they received notice that Cross's court-martial would proceed as scheduled on January 15th. Both were cleared to attend in person if they chose. Video testimony was available if they weren't ready. Sarah looked at Tommy. "What do you want to do?" Tommy's expression hardened. "I want to be there. Want to look him in the face when I describe what his orders cost. Want him to see what 4 years of his cowardice looks like. Then we'll be there." Helen tried to object. "You're both still recovering. Major surgery was 2 weeks ago. You shouldn't be traveling." "The court-martial's on base, Mama. That's 5 minutes from here. We'll be fine." Helen knew better than to argue when Sarah's jaw set in that particular line. She'd seen that expression on her husband's face 1,000 times. Recognized stubbornness that was genetic. "Fine," she conceded. "But I'm driving you both. And if either of you show signs of distress, we're leaving immediately." "Deal." January 15th arrived cold and clear. The kind of Colorado winter day where sky stretches blue and infinite and snow reflects sunlight until everything gleams. Beautiful weather for an ugly reckoning. Helen drove Sarah and Tommy to the JAG building in a borrowed sedan that handled the icy roads with caution. Both passengers wore civilian clothes over bandages and surgical pain. Both moved carefully, mindful of healing tissue that could tear if stressed. The courtroom was smaller than expected. Military tribunals weren't designed for crowds, just enough space for the panel of judges, the accused, the attorneys, and witnesses. A handful of gallery seats for observers. Those seats were full: convoy survivors, Fort Carson personnel, media representatives, people who'd heard the story and wanted to watch justice happen. Major Richard Cross sat at the defense table looking smaller than Sarah remembered. 45 years old, but aging had accelerated in the weeks since his arrest. Gray had invaded his hair. Lines had deepened in his face. He wore his service uniform, ribbons and rank still displayed, though both would be stripped soon. His attorney, a civilian named Harold Webb, expensive suit and rehearsed confidence, sat beside him whispering last-minute strategy. The prosecution table held Captain Julia Brennan, young JAG officer with a reputation for thoroughness and a father who'd served in Korea. She'd built her case with the dedication of someone who believed justice mattered more than win statistics. The panel of judges entered, 3 colonels and 1 general. People who'd spent careers in service and understood what betrayal looked like when it wore a uniform. The proceedings began with formality that felt like ritual. Reading of charges, Cross's plea of not guilty, opening statements that laid out 2 competing versions of truth. Captain Brennan spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of evidence and certainty. 4 years ago, Major Richard Cross gave an order that killed 2 soldiers and destroyed several others. He ordered Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie's team onto unstable terrain despite her objections. When that terrain collapsed and people died, he lied under oath to protect his career. He blamed a decorated NCO for his failures. He let a grieving family bury an empty casket while their son survived alone because rescue efforts stopped too soon. She paused, let the words settle. Today we're here to hold him accountable, to speak for Specialist Linda Hayes, who died bleeding in the snow, for Sergeant Robert Chen, who died calling for his daughter, for Sergeant First Class Tommy Vega, who survived 4 years of hell because no one looked hard enough to find him, and for Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie, who carried guilt that wasn't hers to carry because this man chose cowardice over truth. Webb stood for the defense, smooth, practiced, the kind of attorney who made lies sound reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, this case is about a tragic accident, about terrain that failed, about weather that made rescue impossible, about decisions made in impossible circumstances. Major Cross did what any operations officer would do. He positioned assets for mission success. That the mission ended in tragedy doesn't make him criminally responsible. He gestured towards Sarah and Tommy in the gallery. We will show that Sergeant MacKenzie had the authority to refuse orders she deemed unsafe, that Sergeant Vega's account of events is compromised by 4 years of trauma and isolation, that this prosecution is less about justice and more about finding someone to blame for an accident. The first day of testimony was technical. Weather reports, terrain analysis, expert witnesses explaining snow load and avalanche mechanics. Dry but necessary, building the foundation for what came next. The second day brought the voice recording, played in full for the panel. Cross's voice ordering the team to Eastern Slope. Sarah's objection. Cross's override. Then the sound of the world ending. The courtroom was silent when playback finished. Several panel members were visibly affected. Cross's attorney tried to discredit the recording, questioned chain of custody, suggested editing, but the metadata was clear. Timestamp verified, context undeniable. On the third day, Sarah testified. She walked to the witness stand with a slight limp, surgical pain evident in the way she moved, sat carefully, raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Captain Brennan approached, gentle despite the formality. Sergeant MacKenzie, please describe the events of December 18th, 4 years ago. Sarah spoke clearly, methodically, described the morning briefing, the deployment to Widow's Ridge, the radio call from Cross ordering them to Eastern Slope, her objection based on snow stability assessment, his override. Did you have the authority to refuse that order? Brennan asked. Technically, yes, but Major Cross was the operations officer. Refusing would have required me to claim he was issuing an unlawful order. I was 28, he was my superior. I trusted his judgment. And when the avalanche occurred, Sarah's voice stayed steady. I was thrown clear by the initial blast. Lost consciousness briefly. When I woke, I tried to reach my team. Couldn't find anyone, called for rescue, was told to hold position. Eventually was medevac due to hypothermia. What happened next? I was informed that all 4 team members were declared KIA. I attended no funerals because I was hospitalized, was later subjected to investigation that found me at fault for positioning the team on unstable ground. Did you defend yourself during that investigation? No. Why not? Sarah looked at Cross directly. Because I believed what they told me. Believed I'd killed my team. Believed Major Cross when he testified that I'd insisted on that position. I had no reason to doubt him. Webb cross-examined, aggressive, trying to shake her testimony. Sergeant, isn't it true that you suffered from PTSD following this incident? Yes. Isn't it possible your memory of events is compromised? My memory is supported by the voice recording, which was found on Sergeant Vega's person 4 years after the fact. How convenient. Sarah's expression didn't change. The recorder was in the helicopter wreckage. Tommy kept it because it was evidence. Because he knew the truth would matter eventually. Webb pushed harder. You and Sergeant Vega are close, aren't you? You recently donated a kidney to him. Yes. Isn't it possible you're both lying to protect each other? Creating a story that absolves you of responsibility? Sarah leaned forward despite the pain it caused. I spent 4 years believing I killed my team. 4 years hating myself. 4 years accepting blame for something that wasn't my fault. Why would I suddenly decide to lie now? Webb had no good answer. The fourth day, Tommy testified, he walked to the stand with visible difficulty. 4 years of damage plus recent surgery made each step an effort. But he made it, sat down, swore his oath. Captain Brennan was gentle with him. Started with simple questions. Name, rank, service record. Then carefully moved to the hard part. Sergeant Vega, Please describe what happened after the avalanche. Tommy's voice was quiet but steady. I was buried under about 30 feet of snow, in an air pocket created by overturned vehicle debris. With me were Specialist Linda Hayes, Sergeant Robert Chen, and Private First Class Michael Torres. How long did you remain buried? 4 days before I could dig myself out. But the others, he stopped, swallowed hard. Take your time, Brennan said. Tommy continued. Michael Torres was already dead. Boulder crushed him. Linda Hayes was alive but critically injured. Crushed pelvis, internal bleeding. She was also pregnant, lost the baby from trauma, bled out over approximately 4 hours. I held her while she died. The courtroom was silent enough to hear breathing. Sergeant Chen survived until day 3. Both legs broken, compound fractures. Bone came through the skin, went septic. He died delirious, calling for his daughter. Did you attempt to signal for rescue? Yes, radio was dead. I tried to dig out but was too injured the first week. By the time I could move, I monitored radio traffic and learned I'd been declared KIA. Heard my own funeral on a civilian news broadcast. Why didn't you try to reach base anyway? Tommy looked at Cross because I was young and stupid and thought if the Army had declared me dead and stopped looking, coming back would just cause more pain. So I stayed. Guarded Linda and Doc's graves. Waited. For what? Tommy's good eye found Sarah in the gallery. For Ghost to come back. Because I knew she would. Eventually. Webb's cross-examination was brutal. Suggested 4 years alone had damaged Tommy's memory. Suggested the story was fabricated. Suggested he was lying to help Sarah. Tommy took it all without flinching. When Webb finally ran out of questions, Tommy asked to make a statement. The panel allowed it. Tommy looked directly at Cross, spoke to him and him alone. Sir, I don't hate you. I should. You killed Linda Hayes and Robert Chen through negligence. You destroyed Ghost's career through lies. You let my family mourn me for 4 years while I was alive and findable. But I don't hate you. He paused. I pity you, because you chose your career over their lives. Chose comfort over truth. Chose to let good soldiers suffer rather than admit you were wrong. And now you'll spend years in prison knowing that if you just told the truth 4 years ago, all of this could have been avoided. The courtroom erupted. Panel called for order. Webb objected strenuously. But the words had been said. The truth had been spoken. And nothing could take it back. The panel deliberated for 3 hours. Returned with a verdict that surprised no one. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would be delivered in 1 week, but the outcome was clear. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of all pay and benefits. 15 years in military prison. Cross was led away in handcuffs. Never looked at Sarah or Tommy. Never acknowledged the people he destroyed. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Sarah and Tommy declined comment. Helen guided them both to the car with the efficiency of someone who'd handled hostile environments before. As they drove away, Sarah looked at Tommy. We did it. Tommy nodded. Yeah, we did. That night, back at their hospital rooms, they sat in quiet reflection. Justice had been served. Truth had won. Cross would pay for his crimes. But Linda Hayes and Robert Chen were still dead. 4 years were still lost. Scars still marked them inside and out. So why didn't it feel like victory? Because it's not victory, Tommy said when Sarah asked. It's just closure. And closure doesn't heal everything. What does? Tommy reached across the gap between beds, found her hand, held it. Time, he said, and each other. And choosing to believe that surviving wasn't the end. Just a different kind of beginning. Sarah held his hand and watched snow fall and tried to believe that maybe tomorrow would hurt less than today. And maybe the day after that would hurt less than tomorrow. And maybe, eventually, they'd remember how to live instead of just survive. It wouldn't be easy, but they'd done harder things. Together. The week between verdict and sentencing brought attention neither of them wanted. News outlets ran the story with headlines that reduced complex trauma to digestible sound bites. Hero sniper saves convoy. Soldier survives 4 years alone. Army officer convicted in death, cover up. The public ate it up. Social media exploded with commentary. People who'd never worn a uniform debated military justice. Armchair generals analyzed tactics. Everyone had an opinion about what Sarah should have done, what Tommy should have done, what the Army should have done. Sarah stopped reading comments after the first day. Tommy never started. They focused instead on recovery, on physical therapy sessions that left them sweating and cursing, on medication schedules that ruled their days, on the slow rebuilding of bodies that had been pushed past breaking and somehow held together anyway. Helen stayed through it all, sleeping in waiting rooms, bringing real food to supplement hospital meals, providing the kind of steady presence that makes chaos feel manageable. On January 18th, Tommy's parents visited again. Daniel and Maria Vega, carrying a cake they'd baked themselves and a folder of photographs they wanted to share. Maria hugged Sarah carefully, mindful of surgical scars. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving our son more time, for giving us more years with him." Sarah hugged back, felt the older woman's tears soak into her shoulder, held her until the crying stopped. Daniel shook Tommy's hand with the formality fathers use when emotion is too big for casual gestures, then pulled his son into a hug that lasted minutes. When they separated, Maria opened the folder. Photographs spilled across the bedside table. Tommy at 5 years old, Tommy in high school, Tommy in basic training, Tommy receiving his sergeant stripes. "We thought you should have these," she said, "since your originals were in your apartment that we cleared out." Tommy picked up a photo. Him and his father, fishing trip, maybe 10 years ago, both of them laughing at something off camera. "I remember this day," he said quietly. "You caught a boot. Thought it was a fish. Fought it for 20 minutes. Daniel laughed. "Wettest boot I ever saw. Still have it somewhere. Kept it as evidence of my questionable fishing skills." They spent an hour looking through photographs, rebuilding connections that death had severed and resurrection had restored, choosing to believe that families could survive impossible things and come back stronger. When the Vegas left, they took a photo with them. New one. Tommy and Sarah side by side in hospital beds, healing scars visible, hands joined between beds. Evidence that some bonds don't break even when everything else does. The sentencing hearing on January 22nd was shorter than the trial. Cross stood before the panel looking like he'd aged a decade in a week. His attorney made final arguments for leniency, spoke of Cross's years of service, his family, his previously unblemished record. The panel wasn't moved. Major Richard Cross, the senior judge, said, "You violated the trust inherent in command. You placed soldiers in danger to prove a point. When they died because of your decisions, you lied to protect yourself. You destroyed careers, families, and lives to avoid accountability." The judge paused. "Let the weight settle. This court sentences you to dishonorable discharge from the United States Army, forfeiture of all pay, allowances, and benefits, reduction to the rank of E1, and confinement for 15 years at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas." Cross was led away, uniform stripped of rank and ribbons, reduced to prisoner status, becoming a cautionary tale instead of a career officer. Sarah and Tommy watched from the gallery, felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the hollow acknowledgement that justice couldn't resurrect the dead or restore lost years. Outside, Captain Brennan approached them, offered handshakes and condolences that felt more appropriate than congratulations. "I know this doesn't fix anything," she said, "but it matters. What you both testified to matters. It's on record now. The truth is official." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah said, "for fighting for it." Brennan smiled, tired but genuine. "I had good witnesses. You two made it easy to tell the truth." As she walked away, Helen appeared with the car, ready to take them back to the hospital, back to the routine of recovery that felt both endless and necessary. On the drive, Tommy spoke for the first time in hours. "Ghost, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Linda and Doc would think this was enough? The conviction, the sentence, do you think they'd feel like justice was served?" Sarah considered, thought about Linda's laugh, about Doc's gentle competence, about who they'd been before snow and darkness took them. "I think," she said slowly, "they'd care less about Cross getting punished and more about us getting healed, about us choosing to live instead of just survive, about us using what we learned to help others." Tommy nodded. "Yeah, that sounds like them." Back at the hospital, Dr. Santos was waiting with news. "Both of you are healing ahead of schedule. I'm clearing you for discharge in 3 days. You'll need to continue physical therapy and attend regular checkups, but you can recover at home." Home. The word felt foreign. Sarah had lived in the hospital for nearly a month. Before that, 4 years in base housing that never felt like home. Before that, a childhood room in Colorado Springs that belonged to a different version of herself. Where was home now? Helen answered without being asked. "You're both coming to my house, Colorado Springs. I've got the space, the time, and no intention of taking no for an answer." "Mama," Sarah started to object. "No arguments, baby. You two need somewhere to heal that isn't institution. Somewhere with real food and comfortable beds and people who love you. That's my house. End of discussion. Tommy looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Tommy. They'd spent weeks healing side by side. Couldn't imagine separating now. Thank you, Mrs. MacKenzie, Tommy said, for everything. Helen's expression softened. Call me Helen, Tommy. You gave my daughter a reason to keep fighting when she'd forgotten how. That makes you family. 3 days later, they were discharged. Helen drove them south toward Colorado Springs in morning light that made the mountains look almost gentle. Snow-covered peaks that had nearly killed them. Terrain that had taken everything and somehow, impossibly, given something back. The house on Cascade Avenue looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Victorian architecture weathered by time but maintained with care. Wraparound porch with the swing where her father used to sit watching sunset. Ancient elm in the front yard wearing winter like a shawl. Helen had prepared rooms. Sarah's childhood bedroom, unchanged except for fresh sheets and flowers on the nightstand. The guest room across the hall for Tommy, decorated with the care reserved for honored guests. They settled in slowly, learning the rhythms of civilian recovery. Physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. Doctor visits to monitor kidney function and surgical healing. Quiet mornings drinking coffee and watching snowfall. Evenings reading books, or watching old movies, or just sitting in comfortable silence. Marcus Webb visited every weekend, brought updates from Fort Carson, talked about sniper school preparation, asked questions about technique and mindset and how to be better than he was. Sarah and Tommy answered patiently, turned arrogance into teachable moments. Watched the young corporal transform from someone who mocked what he didn't understand into someone humble enough to learn. 6 weeks post-surgery, Tommy received a letter, handwritten on stationery embossed with Doc Chen's family crest. From Emma Chen, 12 years old now, daughter of a man who died 4 years ago. The letter was short, asked if Tommy would visit, said her mother, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, wanted to hear about her uncle's final days. Said Emma wanted to know her father was remembered. Tommy read it 3 times, hands shaking, face showing the cost of memory. I don't know if I can do this, he told Sarah. Don't know if I can tell a 12-year-old how her father died. Sarah sat beside him on the porch swing. What would Doc want you to do? Tommy was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, he'd want me to tell her the truth. All of it, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Then that's what you'll do. Will you come with me? Tommy looked at her, always. The visit was arranged for the following Saturday. Dr. Chen's home in Fort Carson family housing. Modest 2-story with a yard Emma had filled with bird feeders and wind chimes. Elizabeth Chen answered the door, invited them in with the formality that covers emotion, led them to a living room where Emma waited, 12 years old going on 30, her father's eyes, her father's serious expression. Sergeant Vega, Emma said. You is Ananda, thank you for coming. Tommy sat carefully, surgical scars still tender. Call me Tommy, Emma. Your dad called me Vega, but I think he'd want you to use my name. Emma nodded. Okay, Tommy, I want to know about my dad, about his last days. Mom says you were with him. Tommy glanced at Elizabeth. She nodded permission. So Tommy told her, not the sanitized version, not the one edited for children. He told her about the avalanche, about her father's injuries, about the infection, about the delirium. And he told her about the important parts, about how Doc talked about her constantly, about the drawings she'd sent that he kept in his helmet, about how his final words were her name. He was a hero, Emma, not because he died in uniform, because he spent his last days thinking about you, making sure I knew how much he loved you, making sure someone would remember. Emma cried, so did Elizabeth, so did Sarah and Tommy. When the tears stopped, Emma pulled something from her pocket, a drawing, crayon on construction paper, a man in uniform with a medical bag, a little girl holding his hand, hearts and flowers surrounding them. I made this when I was 8, she said. Before he deployed, it was supposed to be for his birthday. She handed it to Tommy. I want you to have it, because you were there when he needed someone, because you made sure he wasn't alone. Tommy took the drawing with shaking hands. Emma, I can't. Yes, you can, because my dad would want the person who stayed with him to remember him too. Tommy carefully folded the drawing, placed it in his pocket over his heart. I'll keep it safe, I promise. Elizabeth walked them to the door when they left, hugged them both. Thank you for telling her the truth. She needed to know her father's last thoughts were of her. On the drive home, Tommy was quiet, processing. healing in ways that surgery couldn't address. Finally, he said, "That was one of the hardest things I've ever done." Sarah reached over, squeezed his hand. "I know, but I'm glad I did it." "Me too." February brought progress. Sarah's knee regained strength. Tommy's new kidney settled into its work. The scars faded from red to pink. Not invisible, not erased, just quieter. They began planning for the future, discussing teaching positions at Fort Carson's sniper program, talking about using their experience to train the next generation, turning trauma into purpose. Captain Brennan called with news. The Army wanted to award them both the Soldier's Medal, highest honor for non-combat heroism. Ceremony scheduled for March 15th. Sarah and Tommy discussed it, decided to accept, not for themselves, for Linda and Doc, for the 42 convoy survivors, for everyone who'd been part of the story. Helen planned the trip back to Fort Carson, arranged hotels, coordinated with the Vegas, made sure everything was perfect for the people she loved. On March 1st, sitting on the porch watching spring threaten to arrive, Tommy spoke the question that had been building for weeks. "Ghost, what if we can't do it? What if teaching brings back too much? What if we're not strong enough?" Sarah looked at him, at the scars and the missing ear and the blind eye, at the evidence of survival. "Then we'll be not strong enough together, and that will be enough." Tommy smiled. Yeah, that works." They sat in silence, watching mountains that had tried to kill them, choosing to believe that maybe the hardest part was over, choosing to believe that surviving was just the beginning, and that together, they could build something worth surviving for. The story wasn't over, not yet, but it was becoming something new, something that looked a little bit like hope. March arrived with the particular gentleness that Colorado Springs sometimes offers. Snow melting into rivers that carved new paths down mountains. Ice breaking into fragments that caught sunlight and threw it back in pieces. The world warming slowly, carefully, like it too was recovering from trauma and learning to trust warmth again. Sarah stood at the window of her childhood bedroom watching the elm tree in the front yard begin to show the first signs of budding. Tiny green promises that winter wasn't permanent, that things which looked dead could return to life if given time and patience in the right conditions. Her surgical scar had faded to a thin white line on her left side, still tender if she pressed it, still visible in mirrors, but healing, becoming part of her landscape instead of the whole terrain. Tommy's recovery had been slower but steadier. The new kidney had settled into its work with the dedication of an organ that knew it was saving a life. His color had improved week by week until he no longer looked like someone slowly dying. His energy returned in increments, small victories, walking to the end of the block, climbing stairs without stopping, eating full meals without nausea. The missing ear and blind eye were permanent, reminders that survival came with cost. But he'd learned to compensate, turned his head to use his good eye, wore his hair slightly longer to cover the scar tissue where his left ear used to be, moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd faced worse and lived anyway. Helen had transformed into full-time caretaker without ever announcing the role. She managed their medication schedules, drove them to physical therapy appointments, cooked meals that balanced nutrition with comfort, provided the kind of steady presence that makes recovery feel less like endurance and more like returning home. The ceremony was scheduled for March 15th, 10 days away. The Army would present them both with the Soldier's Medal for heroism, not involving actual combat with an enemy. 42 people saved, one impossible resurrection. Dozens of lives changed by choices made in darkness on a mountain that demanded everything. Sarah wasn't sure how she felt about it. Pride seemed wrong when Linda and Doc were still dead. Gratitude seemed inadequate for something that had cost so much. She'd agreed to attend because refusing felt like dishonoring the convoy survivors, like saying their lives didn't matter enough to accept recognition for saving them. Tommy felt similarly conflicted. Told her one evening over coffee that medals didn't bring back the years, didn't restore what he'd lost, didn't make the nightmares stop. But maybe that's not the point, Sarah had answered. Maybe the point is showing other soldiers that surviving is worth celebrating even when it's messy and complicated and hurts like hell. Tommy had considered that, nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe that's exactly the point. Marcus Webb called it a week before the ceremony. Voice excited in a way that reminded Sarah he was still just 24, still young enough to believe the world rewarded effort with success. "Ma'am," he said, Sniper School accepted my application. I start April 1st, and they asked if you and Sergeant Vega would be willing to guest instruct for the first week. Show the new recruits what real Overwatch looks like. Sarah looked at Tommy across the kitchen table. He'd been listening to her side of the conversation, raised his eyebrows in question. She covered the phone. Marcus wants to know if we'll guest instruct at Sniper School. First week of April. Tommy's expression shifted, from uncertainty to something that might have been hope. We cleared for that? Medically? Santos said we could return to light duty whenever we felt ready. Tommy nodded. Then yeah, let's do it. Sarah uncovered the phone. Tell them yes, Corporal. We'll be there. Marcus's whoop of joy was loud enough that Tommy heard it from across the table. Thank you, ma'am. This is going to be incredible. The guys in my class are going to lose their minds when they find out Ghost and Vega are teaching. After hanging up, Sarah and Tommy sat in silence, processing what they just agreed to, returning to Fort Carson, stepping back into roles they'd abandoned or been forced from, teaching the next generation how to do what they'd done. You scared? Tommy asked. Terrified, Sarah admitted. You? Same, but the good kind of terrified. The kind that means we're doing something that matters. Sarah smiled. When did you get so wise? 4 years alone on a mountain gives you time to think. The days before the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation. Helen insisted on buying Sarah a new dress uniform. The old one didn't fit anymore. Too much weight lost and regained in patterns that changed her shape. The new one was tailored perfectly, fit like it was made for someone who'd survived impossible things and wore the evidence in her posture. Tommy's uniform required more adjustment. His frame had changed. 4 years of starvation followed by months of recovery left him leaner, harder, like the mountain had carved away everything unnecessary and left only core elements. They practiced wearing the uniforms, getting used to the weight of fabric and insignia, relearning how to stand at attention, how to salute, how to move like soldiers again instead of patients. Helen watched them practice in the living room, stood in the doorway with tears she didn't bother hiding, pride and grief mixing until they became indistinguishable. You both look like heroes, she said. We look like survivors, Sarah corrected gently. There's a difference. Helen shook her head. Not from where I'm standing. The night before the ceremony, Sarah couldn't sleep, lay in her childhood bed watching shadows from the elm tree dance across the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, about standing in front of people and accepting recognition for something that still felt more like luck than skill. A soft knock at her door. Tommy's voice. Quiet. Ghost? You awake? Come in. Tommy entered wearing sweatpants and the Fort Carson t-shirt Helen had bought him. Sat on the edge of her bed like they were teenagers planning mischief instead of soldiers processing trauma. Can't sleep either? Sarah asked. Keeps running through my head. Tomorrow, the ceremony, all those people watching. I keep thinking, what if I freeze up? What if I can't handle being back on base? Sarah sat up, pulled her knees to her chest. I've been thinking the same thing. Keep imagining walking into Fort Carson and having a panic attack, or seeing the ridge and losing it completely. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then he said, what if we make a deal? If either of us starts to lose it tomorrow, the other one steps in. We face it together, same as everything else. Sarah held out her hand. Tommy took it. They shook like it was a contract instead of a promise between friends. Deal, Sarah said. Together. Together, Tommy echoed. He stood to leave, stopped at the door. Ghost? Yeah? I'm glad you came back. To the ridge, to find me. I know you had reasons beyond just saving the convoy, but whatever the reasons were, I'm grateful. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm glad I came back too, even though it was terrifying, even though it hurt, even though everything about it was impossible. I'm glad. Tommy nodded, left quietly, closed the door with a soft click. Sarah lay back down. This time sleep came easier. March 15th dawned and clear and cold. The kind of morning where breath freezes in air and sunlight looks sharp enough to cut. Perfect weather for a ceremony. Perfect weather for honoring sacrifice. Helen drove them to Fort Carson in her sedan, the same car that had brought them back from the hospital, the same route they'd driven dozens of times for medical appointments. But today felt different. Today felt like crossing a threshold instead of managing symptoms. The base looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Guard stations, administrative buildings, barracks housing soldiers in various stages of training. Everything familiar but changed by her own transformation. Like seeing a childhood home through adult eyes and realizing it was always smaller than memory suggested. They were directed to the parade grounds. Large open space where formations gathered and ceremonies happened, already filling with people, soldiers in dress uniform, civilians in their best clothes, media with cameras and microphones. Everyone assembled to witness something the base had talked about for months. A specialist met them at the entrance, young, nervous, clearly assigned to escort duty and taking it seriously. Sergeants MacKenzie and Vega, if you'll follow me, I'll show you where to wait before the ceremony begins. They followed, through crowds that parted, past faces that stared, hearing whispers that weren't quite quiet enough to miss. That's them. That's Ghost and Vega, the ones from the ridge. The waiting area was a tent set up behind the stage. Private, quiet, a few chairs, water bottles, a mirror where they could check uniforms one last time. Sarah caught her reflection. Master Sergeant Hank restored on her collar. Ribbons earned over years of service displayed on her chest. The Falcon Overwatch patch on her shoulder that she'd folded away 4 years ago and only recently sewn back on. She looked like a soldier again, felt like an imposter, wondered if the gap between appearance and identity would ever close. Tommy appeared beside her in the mirror, his own uniform perfect, his own insignia restored, his own appearance transformed from patient to professional. "We look good," he said, "like we know what we're doing." Sarah smiled. "We're excellent liars. Best kind." The ceremony coordinator appeared, a captain with clipboard and headset and the organized efficiency of someone managing chaos. "5 minutes," she announced. "We'll call you when it's time." Sarah and Tommy sat, hands finding each other automatically, holding on like anchor points. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Everyone standing, hands over hearts, voices joining in song that carried across the parade grounds and into the mountains beyond. Then speeches. Colonel Rutherford spoke about courage and sacrifice, about soldiers who choose service over safety, about the night 42 lives hung in balance and 2 broken soldiers became unbroken long enough to save everyone. Captain Morrison spoke next, representing the convoy survivors, his voice breaking slightly as he described driving blind through whiteout conditions, following sparks that appeared like miracles, trusting a guardian angel they couldn't see but knew was there. "We owe our lives to Master Sergeant MacKenzie and Sergeant First Class Vega," he said, "and no ceremony, no medal, no recognition will ever be adequate payment for that debt. But we offer it anyway, with gratitude that goes beyond words." Then it was time. "Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie, Sergeant First Class Thomas Vega, please come forward." Sarah and Tommy stood, walked out of the tent, into sunlight that felt too bright, onto a stage that felt too exposed, in front of a crowd that numbered in the hundreds. The silence was complete, broken only by wind and the shuffle of feet as everyone came to attention. They stopped center stage, came to attention themselves, saluted the general who would present the medals. Brigadier General Patricia Walsh, distinguished career, 3 deployments. The kind of officer who'd earned respect through competence rather than politics. She held 2 medal cases, opened them. The soldiers' medals gleamed against velvet, bronze, significant, permanent. Walsh pinned Sarah's medal first, spoke words that were probably scripted but sounded sincere, about heroism, about choosing danger to protect others, about embodying the Army values even when the Army had failed her. Then Tommy's. Same words, same sincerity, same weight of recognition. When both medals were pinned, Walsh stepped back, saluted. They returned it. The crowd erupted. Applause like thunder. Soldiers cheering. Civilians crying. The 42 convoy survivors standing as one. Hands together. Voices joined in gratitude that needed sound to express what words couldn't capture. Sarah's vision blurred. Not from tears exactly, from the overwhelming weight of being seen after years of invisibility, of being honored after years of shame. Beside her, Tommy stood rigid, jaw clenched, good eye bright, holding himself together through force of will. Sarah found his hand again, squeezed once, the signal they'd agreed on. "I've got you." Tommy squeezed back. "I've got you too." They stood together while the applause continued, while cameras flashed, while the base bore witness to survival that shouldn't have been possible. And somewhere in the crowd, Helen MacKenzie stood beside Daniel and Maria Vega, all 3 of them crying openly because their children had come home in ways that mattered more than geography. The ceremony concluded with a reception, food, conversation, handshakes and photographs, and people wanting to hear the story firsthand. Sarah and Tommy endured it with the patience soldiers learn, smiling when appropriate, answering questions, accepting gratitude. But after an hour, they needed escape, needed air that wasn't crowded, needed space to process. They slipped away, walked across the parade grounds toward the perimeter road, toward the view of Widow's Ridge visible in the distance. The mountain looked peaceful from here, deceptive. Snow-covered slopes hiding the violence beneath. The eastern slope where Linda and Doc died. The debris field where Tommy survived. The overwatch point where Sarah fired 12 shots that changed everything. We should go up there, Tommy said suddenly. Before we leave Carson, should visit the actual site, say goodbye properly. Sarah looked at him. You sure you are ready for that? No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready. Might as well do it anyway. When? Tomorrow, before we go back to Colorado Springs. While we're still here and still brave enough. Sarah nodded. Okay, tomorrow. They stood watching the ridge until the cold became uncomfortable. Then walked back to find Helen ready with the current congratulations and the promise of a celebration dinner she'd been planning for weeks. That night, at a restaurant Helen had reserved, they sat with the Vegas and raised glasses to survival, to family, to impossible things that happened anyway. Daniel Vega stood, tapped his glass for attention, made a toast that started formal but became emotional halfway through. To my son who refused to die, even when death would have been easier. To Sarah who refused to quit even when quitting would have been justified. To Helen who kept faith when faith seemed foolish. And to Linda Hayes and Robert Chen, who we honor by living fully because they can't. They drank. They ate. They told stories that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. They chose joy despite grief, chose celebration despite cost, chose life because the alternative dishonored everyone who didn't get that choice. The next morning, Sarah and Tommy borrowed Helen's car and drove toward Widow's Ridge. The road was the same one the convoy had traveled, the same one Sarah had climbed alone in December darkness. Now, in March daylight, it looked almost normal, just a mountain road. Nothing special, nothing deadly. But they knew better. They parked at the base, began walking up the approach road. Sarah's knee protested the incline. Tommy's breathing grew labored at altitude, but they continued, one step at a time, together. The debris field appeared after 40 minutes of climbing, still visible despite months of weather, rocks and metal, and the particular chaos that avalanches create. Tommy stopped at the edge, stared at ground that had been his prison and his salvation. Over there, he said quietly, pointing. That's where the vehicle debris created the air pocket, where I was buried with Linda and Doc and Michael. They walked to the spot. Sarah could see it now, the depression in snow where structure had once existed, the scattered remnants of military equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature. Tommy knelt, placed his hand on frozen ground, was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke, to the ground, to the dead, to whatever remained of the people he'd lost. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I had to leave you here for so long. Sorry it took 4 years for anyone to find me and tell your families the truth about what happened. His voice broke. But I want you to know, you weren't alone. I stayed with you until the end, and I'll carry you with me wherever I go next. Linda, Doc, Michael, you're part of me now, part of my story, and I won't let anyone forget you. Sarah knelt beside him, added her own words. I'm sorry I didn't call the retreat faster. Sorry I trusted the wrong person. Sorry you paid for someone else's mistakes. But I promise you this, we'll make sure the next generation learns from what happened here. Make sure your deaths mean something. Make sure no one else has to die because an officer put ego above safety. They stayed kneeling until cold seeped through pants and made staying painful. Then stood, brushed off snow, prepared to continue up the ridge. The overwatch point looked exactly as Sarah remembered. The rock shelf, the sight lines, the particular elevation that made it perfect for watching the valley approach. This is where I set up, she said, where I fired the 12 shots. Tommy walked the position, imagined his spotter scope here, imagined calling when, imagined the partnership they'd once had. We were good together, he said. Best team I ever worked with. Sarah smiled. Same. Think we can be that good again? Teaching instead of operating? Sarah considered. We'll be different, older, more damaged, but maybe that makes us better teachers. We've got scars to prove we survived our mistakes. That's worth something. Tommy nodded. Yeah, it is. They descended slowly, saying goodbye to the ridge that had taken everything and somehow impossibly given back more than it took. Not the same things, different things. Harder things, but things worth having anyway. At the base, Helen was waiting. She'd driven up after giving them space. Knew they needed time alone with their ghost before returning to the world of the living. "How are you both?" she asked as they climbed into the car. Sarah and Tommy exchanged looks. Complicated looks that carried 4 years of history and 3 months of healing and whatever future they were building together. "We're okay," Sarah said. "Actually okay, for the first time in a long time." Helen pulled Sarah into a hug. Then Tommy held them both like a mother who'd nearly lost her children and refused to take their presence for granted. "Then let's go home," she said. "Real home, where you both belong." The drive back to Colorado Springs felt different than the drive up. Lighter somehow, like something heavy had been left on the ridge. Not forgotten, just released. At the house on Cascade Avenue, Helen had prepared a surprise. Led them to the living room where the Christmas tree still stood despite being March. Decorated with ornaments collected over decades. Memories made visible. But one branch was empty, the center branch near the window. The place of honor. Helen handed Sarah a small box, wrapped in fresh brown paper and tied with new twine. Sarah recognized it immediately. The gift she'd been carrying the night she climbed the ridge. The one that got wet and damaged. The ceramic songbird she'd made for her mother years ago. "Mama, I thought this was ruined." Helen smiled. The paper was ruined. The twine was ruined, but the songbird inside was fine, protected by its case, waiting to finally come home. Sarah opened the box with shaking hands. Inside, nested in tissue paper, the ceramic songbird gleamed. Turquoise glaze catching light, tiny and perfect, and everything she'd meant it to be when she'd shaped it from clay a lifetime ago. Tommy moved to stand beside her, looked at the ornament, at the empty branch, at Helen's expectant face. "This is the one you were bringing her the night of the convoy." Sarah nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Helen took the songbird gently, walked to the tree, hung it on the center branch where light from the window illuminated it perfectly. "There," she said softly, "where it belongs, where I've been saving space for years, waiting for my daughter to come home and hang it herself." Sarah moved to the tree, touched the songbird with one finger, felt the smooth glaze, the weight of symbolism, the promise kept despite everything. "I'm home, Mama. Finally home." Helen wrapped her arms around Sarah from behind, rested her chin on her daughter's shoulder. They stood like that, looking at the ornament, at the light-catching ceramic, at proof that some things survive impossible journeys and arrive intact despite every reason they shouldn't. Tommy watched from a respectful distance, witnessing the moment, understanding its significance, knowing he was privileged to see it. Then Helen turned, extended her hand to him. "Come here, Tommy. You're family now. This moment includes you." Tommy hesitated, then stepped forward. Let Helen pull him into the embrace. Let himself be included in something that felt sacred and domestic and absolutely right. The three of them stood at the tree, looking at the songbird, looking at each other, choosing to believe that families could be built from trauma and survival. That home wasn't a place, but a collection of people who refused to let you fall. That evening, sitting around Helen's dining table eating the pot roast she'd spent all day perfecting, conversation turned to the future, to April 1st in sniper school, to teaching soldiers who reminded them of who they'd been before mountains and avalanches and 4 years of hell. "You nervous?" Helen asked. "About teaching?" Sarah looked at Tommy. Tommy looked at Sarah. "Yeah," Sarah admitted. "Terrified we'll screw it up. Terrified we'll let someone down. Terrified we're not qualified to teach when we barely survived ourselves." Tommy added, "But also excited. Excited to pass on what we learned. Excited to maybe prevent what happened to us from happening to someone else. Excited to matter again." Helen reached across the table, took both their hands. "You matter now. You've always mattered. Don't confuse being broken with being worthless. Some of the most valuable people I've known were the broken ones who learned to help other broken people heal." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "When did you get so wise?" "About the same time you got brave enough to climb that ridge." The weeks before sniper school started passed in purposeful preparation. Sarah and Tommy spent hours developing curriculum, talking through what they wished they'd known, what mistakes they'd made, what wisdom came too late to save them but might save others. They practiced teaching, role-played scenarios, refined their approach until it felt natural, until standing in front of a classroom seemed less terrifying and more like purpose. Marcus Webb visited twice, brought questions from his classmates, shared excitement that bordered on worship. Sarah and Tommy worked to temper expectations, to make clear they weren't heroes, just survivors with scars and stories and hard-won knowledge. On March 31st, the night before school started, Sarah couldn't sleep again. Stood at her bedroom window watching the elm tree continue budding, spring taking hold despite winter's attempt to maintain control. A soft knock, Tommy again. Can't sleep? Come in. Tommy entered, sat on the floor instead of the bed, leaned against the wall. They developed this routine, late-night conversations that help process the unprocessable. I keep thinking about tomorrow, Tommy said, about standing in front of those kids and trying to explain what real Overwatch means. Trying to make them understand it's not about glory, it's about responsibility, about making shots that save lives and missing shots that haunt you forever. Sarah slid down to sit beside him on the floor, backs against the wall, shoulders touching, the way soldiers sit when they're too tired to maintain distance. We tell them the truth, she said, all of it, the good and the bad and the terrible. We show them our scars, we share our mistakes. We make them understand that survival isn't heroic. It's just refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then, what if they ask about Linda and Doc? About the 4 years? About things we haven't fully processed ourselves? Then we tell them we're still processing. That some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are. That carrying grief doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Tommy nodded. Okay, we can do this. We can do this. They sat until early morning light began filtering through windows, until Helen's footsteps sounded downstairs making coffee, until the day they'd been preparing for finally arrived. Fort Carson's sniper school occupied a corner of the base that looked exactly like Sarah remembered. Range facilities, classroom buildings, the particular atmosphere of places where precision is taught and mistakes are measured in millimeters. The class waiting for them numbered 20, 19 men, 1 woman, ages ranging from 20 to 35, various levels of experience, all of them looking at Sarah and Tommy like they were legends instead of people. Marcus Webb sat front row, grinning like he'd won something. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom, Tommy beside her, both wearing civilian instructor clothes, both carrying the weight of expectation. Good morning, Sarah began. I'm Master Sergeant Sarah MacKenzie, call sign Ghost. This is Sergeant First Class Thomas Vega. For the next week, we're going to teach you what real Overwatch looks like. Not the Hollywood version, not the video game version, the real version, where you're responsible for lives and mistakes cost everything. Tommy continued, we're not here to make you feel good about yourselves. We're here to make you competent, to make you understand that being a sniper isn't about how many confirmed kills you get. It's about how many people you keep alive, how many bad decisions you prevent, how many soldiers go home because you did your job right. Sarah pulled up a slide, showed the debris field on Widow's Ridge, showed the avalanche aftermath, showed the cost of bad decisions. 4 years ago, our team was ordered onto unstable ground by an officer who put ego above safety. The avalanche killed 2 of our team immediately. A third survived 4 days. A fourth survived 4 years alone. We're going to tell you that story, all of it, because if you learn from our mistakes, maybe you won't have to make your own. For the next hour, they told it, the real story, not the sanitized version, not the one edited for heroism, the one with blood and guilt and 4 years of hell. The classroom was silent when they finished. 20 faces processing, 20 soldiers understanding that the legends standing before them were just people who'd survived by refusing to quit. Marcus raised his hand. Sarah nodded permission. Sergeants, how do you live with it? With knowing people died on your watch? With carrying that weight? Tommy answered, you don't live with it. You live alongside it. It becomes part of your landscape. Some days it's background noise. Some days it's everything. But you keep moving because stopping dishonors everyone who didn't get the choice to keep moving. Sarah added, and you find purpose in it. You teach the next generation. You make sure their mistakes don't cost what yours did. You turn trauma into wisdom and hope that makes the weight worth carrying. The week passed in intense focus. Sarah and Tommy taught everything they knew. Wind reading, range estimation, target identification. But more importantly, they taught judgment. When to shoot, when to hold, when to call for backup, when to admit you don't know. They taught through stories, through scars, through honesty that made the students uncomfortable and better for it. On the final day, they took the class to a range that overlooked terrain similar to Widow's Ridge, made them practice in conditions that mimicked that December night. Wind, cold, darkness, pressure. Marcus was the last to shoot, set up his position exactly as Sarah had taught, checked wind, ranged target, breathed correctly, squeezed trigger with perfect pressure. Hit dead center. Tommy watched through spotting scope, called it. Perfect shot, Webb. Your spotter would be proud. Marcus came off the rifle, looked at Tommy, at Sarah. Thank you for everything, for showing us what this really means. Sarah smiled. You earned it, Corporal. Now go earn it again every single day. The class graduation was small, just Sarah, Tommy, and the 20 students who'd survived their instruction. No ceremony, no medals, just acknowledgement that they'd learned what they needed to learn. As the students dispersed, Marcus hung back, handed Sarah and Tommy a folder. The class made you something, a gift, for teaching us the truth. Inside the folder was a photograph, all 20 students standing at attention. Behind them a sign they'd made, Ghost and Vega Overwatch School, where legends teach truth. Sarah laughed, shook her head. We're not legends, Marcus. With respect, ma'am, you are. You just don't see it yet. After he left, Sarah and Tommy sat on the range, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Think we made a difference? Tommy asked. Sarah thought about 20 students who now understood responsibility, who now knew what failure looked like, who now carried stories that might save lives. Yeah, she said, I think we did. They drove back to Colorado Springs in comfortable silence, thinking about the week, about teaching, about purpose found in unlikely places. Helen met them at the door, hugged them both, had dinner waiting, had the house warm and welcoming. Over pot roast again, because Helen believed comfort food solved most problems, they talked about the future, about continuing to teach, about making it permanent, about building something that honored Linda and Doc and Michael by preventing others from dying the same way. I'm proud of you both, Helen said, for turning pain into purpose, for choosing to help instead of hide. Sarah looked at Tommy. Tommy looked at Sarah. We learned from the best, Sarah said. You taught us that surviving isn't the end goal, living is. Helen's eyes filled. Your father would be so proud of both of you. That night, Sarah stood at her bedroom window one last time, looking at the elm tree now fully budded, spring established, winter definitively over. Behind her in the living room, the ceramic songbird hung on its branch, catching moonlight, gleaming quiet and persistent. Proof that some things survive impossible journeys and arrive exactly where they belong. Tomorrow they'd return to Fort Carson, sign contracts to teach full-time, begin the work of turning trauma into curriculum, begin the work of saving lives by teaching others to save lives. But tonight, Sarah just breathed, just existed, just allowed herself to feel what a survival actually meant when you stopped running and started living. A soft knock, always Tommy. Come in. He entered, sat on the floor, their spot. Sarah joined him, backs against the wall, shoulders touching. We did it, Ghost, we survived. Yeah, Vega, we did. What now? Sarah smiled. Now we help other people survive. And we keep breathing. And we remember that every day we wake up is a day we choose. Grief or gratitude, guilt or grace. Tommy took her hand, held it like he'd held it through surgery and recovery and testimony and healing. I choose gratitude, he said. Me too. They sat until Helen called them down for hot chocolate, until the house smelled like cinnamon and safety, until being alive felt less like accident and more like purpose. Outside, Widow's Ridge stood against starlight, silent, waiting, still dangerous, still beautiful, still the place that took everything and somehow gave back more. But Sarah didn't need to climb it again, didn't need to prove anything to mountains or army or herself. She just needed to be here, in this house, with this family, building this future. The songbird hung on its branch. The elm tree grew new leaves. Spring arrived despite winter's certainty it wouldn't. And two soldiers who'd learned to be ghosts remembered how to be human again. Together, always together. The end and the beginning. 1 year later, March 15th, anniversary of the ceremony, anniversary of recognition, anniversary of choosing to believe that surviving meant something beyond just breathing. Sarah stood at Overwatch Point Delta for the third time in her life. First time 4 years ago when everything ended. Second time 3 months ago when she and Tommy said goodbye to ghosts. Third time now when the Army dedicated a permanent memorial. The wind was gentler than she remembered. Or maybe she was just stronger now, better at standing against things that tried to push her over. Beside her, Tommy stood with the particular confidence of someone who'd survived his body trying to kill him and come out the other side functional. The new kidney had given him years, maybe decades, time he'd used teaching soldiers how to keep other soldiers alive. Behind them, a crowd gathered, bigger than expected. Fort Carson personnel, convoy survivors, families of the fallen, media documenting history as it became official. And standing front and center, Helen MacKenzie holding hands with Daniel and Maria Vega, three parents who'd nearly lost their children and chosen to build family from shared trauma. The memorial was simple: black granite, three names carved deep enough that weather wouldn't erase them. Linda Hayes, Robert Chen, Michael Torres. Below their names, an inscription: they served with honor. They died with courage. They are remembered with love. December 18, 2020. And below that, a second inscription added at Tommy's insistence: survived by SFC Thomas Vega, who waited, who witnessed, who never forgot. The dedication ceremony was brief. Colonel Rutherford spoke. Dr. Elizabeth Chen spoke about her brother. Emma Chen, now 13, read a poem she'd written about fathers who become memories but never truly leave. Then Tommy stepped forward, asked permission to speak, was granted it. He faced the memorial, faced the names, faced the crowd, spoke with the clarity that comes from processing pain until it becomes wisdom. A year ago, I was a ghost, not the good kind, the kind that haunts, the kind that exists between living and dead and doesn't know which side to claim. Linda, Doc, and Michael died because someone put ego above safety. I survived because luck and stubbornness sometimes outweigh logic. Ghost survived because she refused to believe guilt was the same as truth. He paused, let words settle. This memorial isn't about making us feel better. It's about making sure no one forgets that leadership matters, that decisions have weight, that soldiers aren't statistics. They're people with families and futures and the right to come home alive. Tommy turned to face Sarah, gestured for her to join him. She walked to his side, stood shoulder to shoulder. Partners again. Ghost and I teach now, Tommy continued. Teach kids who remind us of who we were. Teach them that surviving isn't about being the best shot or the fastest thinker. It's about being the person your team can trust. The person who chooses their lives over your ego. The person who climbs mountains in blizzards because 42 people need guidance and you're the only one who knows the terrain. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice carrying across the crowd. Linda Hayes was 23 years old, pregnant, kept it secret because she needed 6 more months for benefits. She died bleeding in the snow, asking if I made it out. I carry her last words with me every day. Robert Chen was 31, had a daughter named Emma who sent him drawings. He died calling her name, wanting one more moment with the child he loved more than his own life. Michael Torres was 19, wrote letters home by hand because his grandmother didn't do email. He died instantly, never knew what hit him, never got to say goodbye. Sarah's voice strengthened. We teach in their names. We save lives in their memory. We make sure every student who graduates our program understands that the people depending on them are someone's Linda, someone's Doc, someone's Michael, someone's child who deserves to come home. The crowd was silent. Then Corporal Marcus Webb, now Sergeant Marcus Webb, stepped forward from the ranks, led the assembled soldiers in salute. 20 hands raised simultaneously, held position, honoring the dead, acknowledging the survivors, recognizing that both groups deserved respect. Sarah and Tommy returned the salute, held it until their arms ached, until the gesture became prayer instead of protocol. When hands lowered, the ceremony concluded. People dispersed slowly, some visiting the memorial, some standing in quiet reflection, some crying because grief doesn't follow schedules. Emma Chen approached Sarah and Tommy, handed them each a folded piece of paper, the drawings her father kept in his helmet, carefully preserved, offered back to the people who'd been with him at the end. He'd want you to have these, Emma said. Want you to remember he was more than how he died. He was my dad, and he was your friend, and that matters more than the avalanche. Sarah took the drawing with shaking hands. A stick figure family, dad in uniform, Emma holding his hand, hearts everywhere. The innocence of 8-year-old Art carrying the weight of permanent loss. We'll keep them safe, Sarah promised. We'll make sure people know who he was. Emma nodded, hugged them both. walked back to her mother, who waited with the particular patience mothers learn when their children grieve. As the crowd thinned, Captain Morrison approached. Now Major Morrison, promoted, decorated, still carrying gratitude for sparks in darkness. Sergeants, he said formally. Then dropping formality, Sarah, Tommy, I wanted you to know, my daughter was born 2 weeks ago. We named her Grace, Grace Linda Morrison, after the grace you showed in saving us, and after Specialist Hayes, who died so we could live. Sarah's throat closed. Tommy's good eye filled. That's, Sarah managed, that's beautiful. Thank you. Morrison shook their hands, walked away before emotion made him unprofessional. Helen appeared with thermoses of coffee and the practical wisdom of someone who knew ceremonies were exhausting. You two okay? Sarah took the coffee, wrapped cold hands around warm metal. Yeah, Mama, we're okay. Tommy took his thermos, added, better than okay. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. The three of them stood looking at the memorial, at the names, at the proof that death demands remembering, but life demands moving forward. You know what today is? Helen asked. Anniversary of the medal ceremony, Sarah answered. Helen shook her head. It's the day you both chose to believe that surviving wasn't the end of your story, just the middle, the hard middle, but still just middle. Tommy smiled. When did you get so philosophical? When I became the mother of 2 stubborn soldiers who refused to stay broken. They finished their coffee, watching the sun track across sky, watching shadows move across granite, watching the mountain that had tried to kill him stand indifferent and beautiful against blue. Finally, Helen spoke again. There's one more thing. I have something for both of you. She pulled 2 small boxes from her coat pocket, identical size, wrapped simply. Sarah and Tommy opened them simultaneously. Inside each box, nested in tissue paper, a ceramic ornament, small birds, one turquoise like Sarah's songbird, one deep blue like mountain shadow. I made them myself, Helen said. Took a pottery class, probably terrible technique, but they were from the heart. Wanted you both to have something that represents return, that represents home, that represents family built from impossible circumstances. Sarah held her blue bird carefully, turned it in the light, saw her mother's fingerprints in the glaze, saw love made tangible. Mama, this is perfect. Helen smiled. Hang it next to the songbird, so they're together, like you two. Tommy held his bird with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Mrs. MacKenzie, Helen. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to dinner every Sunday, Helen answered. Say you'll keep being part of this family. Say you'll let yourself be loved by people who choose you. Tommy's voice broke. I can do that. The 3 of them walked down from the memorial together. Helen between Sarah and Tommy, arms linked, moving carefully on terrain that had been deadly and was now just difficult. At the base, the Vegas waited. They'd stayed back during the private moment, but were ready now with hugs and lunch plans and the easy affection families develop when they stop being strangers and start being support systems. The 6 of them, Helen and Sarah, Tommy and his parents, drove to a restaurant in Colorado Springs, ate too much food, told too many stories, laughed until people at other tables stared, chose celebration over solemnity because the dead don't need more tears. They need more living done in their names. After lunch, Sarah and Tommy drove to Fort Carson for evening instruction. They taught 4 nights a week now, regular schedule, permanent positions, making difference measurable in students who graduated competent instead of just confident. Marcus Webb met them at the classroom, had questions about wind reading and variable conditions, asked with the humility he'd learned through failure and correction and being shown grace when he didn't deserve it. They answered patiently, demonstrated, corrected, taught the way they wished they'd been taught, with honesty that hurt but healed. When the session ended, Marcus lingered. Sergeant MacKenzie, Sergeant Vega, I heard something. Rumor. Want to know if it's true. What rumor? Sarah asked. That you're both being considered for the Overwatch program director positions. That the Army wants you to run the whole school, not just teach. Sarah and Tommy exchanged looks. The offer had come 2 weeks ago. They'd been discussing it, processing what it would mean. It's not a rumor, Tommy confirmed. It's an offer. We're thinking about it. Marcus's face lit up. You should take it. Both of you, the program needs people who understand what it costs, who won't send students into situations without understanding the weight. We'll see, Sarah said. It's a big decision. After Marcus left, Sarah and Tommy sat in the empty classroom, thinking about director positions, about responsibility, about whether they were ready for that kind of authority. What do you think? Tommy asked. Should we do it? Sarah looked around the classroom, at the range visible through windows, at the mountains beyond, at the place where they'd found purpose after losing everything. I think, she said slowly, we didn't survive this much to play it safe. I think Linda and Doc and Michael would want us to take the shot, make the impact, change the system that failed us. Tommy nodded, then we take it. Together. Together. They shook hands like a contract, like a promise, like partners who'd learned that some bonds don't break even when everything else does. The drive back to Colorado Springs felt like returning home instead of retreating to safety. The house on Cascade Avenue glowed with lights Helen left on because she refused to let them come home to darkness. Inside, the ceramic birds hung on the tree branch, turquoise and blue, side by side, catching light and throwing it back in pieces. Sarah stood looking at them, at proof that surviving was just the beginning, at evidence that broken things could be beautiful if given time and patience in the right conditions. Tommy appeared beside her. We made it, Ghost. All the way through. Out the other side. Sarah smiled. Reached for his hand, found it waiting. Yeah, Vega, we did. What now? Now we live. Really live. Not just survive. We build. We teach. We love. We remember. We honor. We choose gratitude over grief. We choose grace over guilt. We choose life because the people we lost don't get that choice. Tommy squeezed her hand. Sounds like a good plan. Helen appeared in the doorway. Called them to the kitchen where dinner was ready and family was waiting, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight just brought peace. They went. Together. Always together. Outside, Widow's Ridge stood against starlight. Silent. Permanent. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. But inside warmth. Inside laughter. Inside family built from trauma and choice, and the stubborn refusal to let tragedy define them. The songbird hung on its branch. Spring became summer, became fall, became winter, became spring again. Years passed. Sarah and Tommy ran the Overwatch program with the competence earned through failure and the wisdom bought with scars. Trained hundreds of students. Saved lives by teaching others to save lives. Made Linda and Doc and Michael's deaths mean something by preventing others from dying the same way. Marcus Webb graduated top of his class, became an instructor himself, taught the next generation what Ghost and Vega taught him, passed forward the grace he'd been given. Emma Chen joined the Army as a combat medic, followed her father's path, carried his legacy, made his sacrifice meaningful by saving lives he couldn't save. The convoy survivors stayed in touch. Annual reunions, shared memories, chosen family built from the night 42 people should have died but didn't. Helen MacKenzie lived to see her daughter become whole again. Lived to see Tommy become the son she'd never had. Lived long enough to know that sometimes the hardest stories have the best endings. And on quiet nights, when the world was still and the mountains were just shadows against sky, Sarah would stand at her window looking at the elm tree that grew new leaves every spring, despite winter's certainty it wouldn't. She'd think about impossible things that happened anyway. She'd think about surviving when survival seemed impossible. She'd think about choosing to live when existing would have been easier. And she'd smile, because the story wasn't about the mountain that tried to kill them. It was about the people who refused to stay dead, who climbed out of their graves, who learned to breathe again, who turned pain into purpose, and trauma into teaching, and grief into grace, who became living proof that broken doesn't mean finished, that surviving is just the beginning, that the hardest part of any story is choosing to write the next chapter instead of closing the book. Sarah chose to write. Tommy chose to write. Together, they wrote an ending that looked like a beginning. And the songbird, small and turquoise and perfect, hung on its branch catching light. Proof that some gifts arrive late but arrive exactly when they're needed most. Proof that home isn't a place. It's the people who refuse to let you fall. It's the choice to stand up one more time. It's the decision that today, you choose life over death, hope over despair, love over fear. And every day that choice gets a little bit easier, until one day you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living, really, truly living. And that makes every impossible thing worth it. Every scar, every tear, every moment you wanted to quit but didn't. All of it, worth it. The songbird knows. It's been waiting to tell you. You're home now. You're safe now. You're loved now. And that's enough. That's always been enough. Welcome home.